When his daughter disappears, a desperate father turns to a psychic for answers.
She's passed.
The psychic tells him she's already dead.
My mind just didn't want to accept it.
But detectives are skeptical.
As a detective, I have to look at hard, plain facts.
But as her visions begin to ring true, they bring a warning.
I really feel panic.
Same guy that killed Stacy is going to kill again.
Can the psychic lead police to a killer before it's too late? July 22nd, 1992. In Tempe, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix. College student Stacy Hendrickson disappears from her apartment without a trace. She was just 21. For her father back home in Ohio, it's the worst thing he can imagine.
I never ever thought I'd have to face this kind of thing in my life. My mind just didn't want to accept it. And then finally when it hit me, I just, like I say, my knees buckled and I just fell in the chair.
In Arizona, Stacy was going to college, away from home for the first time. A compassionate, caring young woman, Stacy was training to help children with diabetes, a condition she herself suffered from. If she's still alive, her disease may be her worst enemy.
There's a time element involved, and it's very serious. She's probably got approximately 48 hours before she'd go into insulin coma.
Tempe, Arizona detective Alan Reed is placed in charge of the investigation. He begins at her apartment, where she was last seen.
We knew that Stacy was missing and that she was diabetic, and I found inside the refrigerator her insulin, which she needed to take. And we thought that she would have taken that with her if she had gone voluntarily with someone. But it was obvious that there had been some type of force used, as we had two forced open doors.
Stacy's roommate Virginia was at her mother's the night Stacy disappeared. She provides a list of friends for police to talk to. Reed hopes one of them will know where Stacy is. But back in Ohio, 2,000 miles from the investigation, Stacy's father can't just sit back and wait. A neighbor convinces him to talk to a psychic.
Hi, I'm Molly.
Hi, Gail. I felt some desperation in his voice that kind of made me realize that whether he was skeptical or not, he was at wit's end.
Gail St John claims she can see and feel things that most of us cannot. Her gift has helped to find other missing children. Maybe she could find Stacy.
And I started looking at Stacy's picture. And I was just kind of, just picking up vibrations between looking at the picture and feeling Raleigh, and just kind of, and all of a sudden, just, it was so fast, Stacy was next to me. And I kind of took Raleigh's hand and said to him, I have to tell you something. Stacy's gone.
And I just kind of a lump in my throat. And she starts describing an area.
I'm seeing this building that's
saying that there's a small building about probably 12 by 14. And she said there's water real close by.
What does it all mean? Could Stacy be showing Gail where to find her body?
Then I looked down, straight down, and the dirt was cracked. And I had never seen anything like this before.
She was like in her own little world, but if she wasn't in no trance, she just basically was walking around the room and just talking. I started thinking that she's actually right there.
But Gail St John is picking up more than just visions.
Along with voice and showing me pictures, that she was impressing with feelings. It was almost a like rope or something around the wrist, and it really felt that hot burning when it went into me. I actually saw everything just go black around me.
Gail believes Stacy was murdered, bound and shot in the back of the head.
But there's a lot of things you try not to go into as far as those details.
Whether she was real, it was an act, whether I having the skepticism that I had, and being 2,000 miles away or 1,800 miles away, I just didn't know. I couldn't say it was for real or it wasn't at that point in time. Later on, that's a different story, but right then
Back in Tempe, Arizona, Detective Reed's investigation continues. He has few leads, but forensics have unearthed one important clue. Whoever forced their way into Stacy's apartment left fingerprints behind. Maybe someone in Stacy's apartment complex saw something.
Have you heard anything unusual in the last several hours?
No.
Reed gets lucky. Stacy's neighbor across the hall witnessed the break-in.
Pushing on the door and banging on the door.
Who was this mysterious intruder? Did he kill Stacy as the psychic believes? The disappearance of a 21-year-old college student in Tempe, Arizona sends a desperate father to a psychic. But what she sees, he doesn't want to hear. She tells him his daughter is already dead. But police believe Stacy Hendrickson has been abducted and could still be alive. Now they've found a witness who could lead them to Stacy.
He hears the sound of steps coming up to this second-floor apartment. And as he is awake, he hears some pounding on the door. So he looks through the peephole and he sees this young white male, approximately 25 years old, banging on the door.
Banging on it, there's no answer or anything, so finally
He tries forcing open the door with his shoulder, with his hands, and then does a little drop kick and then makes entry. What concerned me is the neighbor doesn't call the police. Told me that it was his opinion that this was a boyfriend-girlfriend dispute. He didn't want to get involved. He told me that the person that entered was a white male, clean-cut looking, and was wearing a very distinctive black T-shirt. And he said that this had on it a skull.
In Ohio, Roland is desperate to find out anything about his daughter, so he calls Detective Reed and tells him about Gail St. John and her strange visions. At first, his request falls upon deaf ears.
I considered psychics and stuff that they did, the word I use is mumbo-jumbo. As a cop, I have to look at hard, plain facts. And so, as a courtesy, and it was a courtesy to Raleigh, we contacted Gail St. John.
Would this be the phone call that would change the course of Detective Reed's investigation?
I was so busy, and I was so not wanting to waste my time. I gave Gail's number to a partner that was working this case with me. I asked him to call.
I kind of felt the skepticism.
Gail tells Reed's partner where they'll find Stacy's body. She describes palm trees to the south, a chain-link fence, cracked dirt, a small corrugated shed with a slanted roof. And then she tells the detective something she hasn't told Roland. Gail believes Stacy was murdered, shot in the back of the head.
When I first told him that you're dealing with a murder rather than an abduction, he was kind of hesitant.
But Detective Reed is not about to turn his missing persons investigation into a homicide based on the word of someone who claims to talk to dead people.
The information she had given to us was useless. It didn't lead us anywhere. We couldn't put that information out on a police radio or even begin to look anywhere. And at this point, we don't even have a body. We don't even have a victim.
You know, there is really no convincing someone that you're right or you're wrong. You have to let things fall into place. If I tell you something and then later it happens, then it fell into place. Now you understand, you believe.
2 days later, after the call, something does happen. Something that will change Reed's skepticism forever. A city worker finds a body in a dumpster next to the Tempe Canal.
This was just another routine, if you will, death call for me. But as I drove down that canal road, I start to remember, all right, now, Gail said it was near water. Well, the canal's full of water. I get out of my police car and I see palm trees to the south. I look down and I'm walking on cracked earth. And oh my gosh, I see a rolling machine, which is a conveyor belt. And this machine specifically removes debris from the canal as it floats down and places that debris into a dumpster. The hair on the back of my neck was just standing straight up because everything that Gail had told the police, it was like a picture. It couldn't be a better match.
When police remove the body, it's so badly decomposed from the hot sun and water that a photo ID is impossible. Was the psychic right? Is Stacy dead, and could this be her body? The disappearance of a 21-year-old college student sends her father to a psychic. Gail St. John tells him his daughter is already dead. Police believe she could still be alive, but when a body is discovered in a canal, just as the psychic predicted, the lead detective begins to take her visions seriously.
Even though I could not make a positive ID of her at that point, based on what Gail said, in my heart I knew that this was Stacy Hendrickson.
One other clue convinces Reed the body is Stacy's. Something Gail St. John said.
And as I picked Stacy's body up, I could see that she had ligature marks on her wrist and that she had been bound. And she was x-rayed, and it was apparent from the x-ray that she had been shot in the head. And at that point, I became somewhat of a convert to the information and the gift or the ability that Gail St. John had.
A hard-boiled detective is now a believer, and with a killer on the loose, he wonders what else Gail St. John knows. Can the psychic really help the cop find Stacy's killer?
I can't tell you how astounded I am. I do have a killer out there, and the information you gave us was accurate.
I think he, at that point, dropped his skepticism and was more open to saying, okay, now I see what you said was right. Where do we go from here?
The next day, Stacy's father flies to Arizona to help ID the body of his daughter. He has yet to see how accurate Gail was.
I was hoping it wasn't Stacy. That's what my guts was saying.
Still waiting for dental records to make a positive ID, Detective Reed shows Roland 3 earrings that he recovered from the body.
I had bought her 3 diamond studs, and they graduated from small to a medium to a little bit bigger. And she was minus an ear on the one side, but this ear had these 3 diamonds in it. And that was a very identifying thing to me.
Detective Reed takes Roland to the bleak spot where his daughter was found.
When we got there, he was amazed. He was amazed at what he saw, that were really exactly as Gail had said.
I drill on that constantly. To have to come and find your daughter or your son in a situation like this where they wind up basically, dumped in a dumpster like garbage. It's pretty hard to take. It just...
Once we had recovered Stacy's body, I can't begin to describe the pressure then that begins.
Just as Gail St. John predicted, Detective Reed has a homicide on his hands. Reed now follows up on dozens of leads, but none lead to a suspect. The psychic was right about where Stacy's body would be found and the terrible way in which she died.
Detective Reed,
Days after discovering the body, Reed gets a disturbing call from Gail.
I really feel panic. I feel panic.
She says the killer is about to strike again.
the same guy that killed Stacy is going to kill again. Who's he going to kill? Virginia. I mean, she's real specific.
I'm feeling terrible panic now. Stacy's just going wild here. trying to describe what's happening and what's going to happen, and the roommate's life is in danger. She's going to go see this guy, and she's just going so fast. I'm trying to absorb it, and of course, the detectives are you still there? Yeah, but I'm trying to listen to your conversation and hers. And sometimes you feel like you're halfway between two worlds.
And part of me goes, this is pretty outlandish. The other part of me says, you know what? I can't disregard it. Look what happened when we went to the scene and found all those things she said.
Reed heeds Gail's warning and asks Virginia, Stacy's roommate, to come down to the station. Gail has also told him that Virginia knows the killer and is reluctant to make him a suspect.
And about an hour ago. And then I look at her in the eyes, and I said, I just got a call from Gail St John. And she says that the same person who took the life of your friend is going to kill you tonight.
In Tempe, Arizona, a missing persons case has become a full-scale homicide investigation. Eerily, psychic Gail St John predicted that 21-year-old Stacy Hendrickson had been murdered days before police found her body. Now, Gail is warning police that the killer is about to kill again. She says that Stacy's spirit has told her that the next victim will be her roommate, Virginia.
I tell her that Stacy's father had contacted a lady who has a gift. And as I'm talking to Virginia, I'm placing the Polaroids in front of her. And then I look at her in the eyes, and I said, I just got a call from Gail St John. And she says that the same person who took the life of your friend is going to kill you tonight. And when I said those words, the blood drained out of her face. She turned white, and she teared up. And I'll never forget, she immediately said to me, check out John, check out John.
John Adams is a 26-year-old manager of a local fast food restaurant. Adams met both Stacy and her roommate just a few weeks before Stacy was killed. Incredibly, Virginia has a date with him that very night. With no time to lose, Reed tracks down Adams at his workplace. If Gail is right, this man's prints should match the set left on Stacy's door.
He was very cordial, and he was very cooperative. He told me that he knew Stacy. He told me that he was dating Virginia. I saw no sign of emotion from him. I asked him if he could assist me in the investigation by allowing me to take his photograph and also to take a sample of his fingerprints.
The prints turn out to be a perfect match, but that's not enough to charge Adams. There's no murder weapon, and nothing as yet that links him to the shooting.
And Gail St John she's done her job, and it's now my job to build a factual case of things that people understand in court that I can use to put him away.
Reed's hard work finally pays off. Adams does own a skull t-shirt that matches the one the neighbor saw the man banging on Stacy's door wearing. Not only that, but it turns out that Adams had recently bought a gun, the same caliber as the murder weapon. Armed with the new evidence, Reed pulls Adams in for questioning. Once again, Gail St John's eerie predictions are confirmed.
So everything is now just adding up. Everything points to John Adams. And I need to convince him to make this right, to tell the truth. We began the interview and talking about, really, John. In the back of my mind is a warning that I received from Gail St John. And she has told me I need to be very careful with him. John is full of rage and anger, but she tells me that he can change from this nice, courteous young man to a raging bull. I need you to know that... And at a certain point in the interview, I could tell that John was ready to talk. John began to weep. He did tell me at that point that he did kill Stacy Hendrickson. He did what? That this was a murder, and I would have to charge him with a murder. In the twinkling of an eye, and becomes this raging bull and attacks me. No! No! Again, what Gail St John had said was true. This man attacked me.
John Adams is charged with the murder of Stacy Hendrickson, and he eventually makes a full confession. In court, the final terrible moments of Stacy's last night alive were revealed. On July 22nd at 2 a.m., Adams arrived at Stacy's apartment, fueled on drugs and alcohol. He banged on the door, kicked it in, and chased Stacy into the bedroom. There he shot her in the back of the head, her pillow muffling the sound of the bullet and the bedsheets catching the spray of blood. Adams then wrapped her body in the blood-stained sheets and dumped the evidence in the Tempe Canal. Days later, it was siphoned from the water and deposited in a dumpster, the exact location described by Gail St. John.
I went on to work homicide almost 10 years, and in those 10 years, I never, ever dealt again with someone like Gail St. John.
Stacy saved her roommate's life. That's what it boils down to. If she hadn't said it to me, if she hadn't got that across to me, then we would have had another murder.
In court, Adams pleads guilty to manslaughter and is sentenced to 29 years in jail.
I figure you'd have to be a little crazy to do something like that, but I don't know how they feel. What promotes them thoughts to do things like that to some innocent person. After all, she was in her room bed, sleeping. She wasn't bothering anybody. You know, why?
In Portland, Maine, a beautiful young woman vanishes one night while out on the town.
We have no crime scene. We have no body.
Is she alive or dead?
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again.
Desperate, the top detective turns to a psychic for help.
And immediately, when he started talking, she was right there.
I can hear now.
Can the psychic's mysterious visions help police to find Amy?
Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
Portland, Maine, a peaceful city in historic New England. But on October 21st, 2001, that peace was shattered. Amy St. Laurent, a 25-year-old administrative assistant and Portland native, disappears into the night. Amy was charming, fun-loving, and according to everyone, reliable.
Amy's a responsible young woman who didn't turn up for work on Monday, not prone to disappearing and not getting her cat fed and leaving her personal belongings behind.
I miss her. I want her back. Anything anyone can do to help would be really appreciated.
It wasn't just her family who were desperate to find Amy. The entire city was looking for her.
Portland is a small city. Everybody was aware of it. Amy's picture was everywhere. You couldn't walk a block without seeing her photograph.
Deputy Chief Joe Laughlin of the Portland Police is in charge of a team of detectives working the case.
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again. I mean, she just basically disappears. And there are no answers. The public's demanding answers.
And one of our best reporters went downtown, and the family was hanging up posters with her picture, and they were visibly distraught. And I think everybody just couldn't believe what was going on, and their hearts just went out to the family.
What police know is that at the Pavilion nightclub, Amy became separated from her friend around midnight. Though he searches, he can't find her in the crowded club. Frustrated, he leaves. After that, she vanishes.
Portland police continue their search for Amy St. Laurent, the 25-year-old administrative...
Lieutenant Lachlan is feeling the heat. He has to find Amy, but has few leads.
And police are asking anyone with information to come forward.
We had zip. We had nothing. We had some speculation, conjecture. We have no crime scene. We have no body. We have no physical evidence.
5 days after Amy disappeared, driving into police headquarters, Lachlan tunes in a voice on his car radio.
Q97.9, this is Vicki Monroe with Spirit Messenger.
It is a moment that will change the course of the investigation.
Hi, Vicki. My name's Jackie.
Hi, Jackie. Jackie, has your mother and father passed?
Yes, both my parents are dead.
At radio station Q97.9 in downtown Portland, psychic Vicki Monroe is hosting her weekly call-in show. She's helping listeners connect, so she says, with their dead loved ones.
I see them very clearly defined. I hear them, and I also get a sensation of whatever they're feeling or how they might have passed. Your parents are both fine, alive and well, as they put it on the other side. Your mother says, though, that you were there when she passed?
Actually, I was.
And were you holding her hand?
I was.
And did you tell her it was okay to go?
I did.
Okay.
So as I'm listening to the radio, I said, you know what? I'm going to call this woman when I get to work and see if she can tell me where Amy is.
Can a psychic radio show host really help a cop find a missing woman?
Why not? Why not? My frame of mind is perhaps this can trigger some thought process in me, some further inquiry to the detectives, some information that we may not have thought about. Joe Lachlan, I'm a lieutenant at the Portland Police Department. I'm wondering if perhaps you can help me with something. Have you heard of the Amy St. Laurent case?
Lieutenant Lachlan's phone call triggers an extraordinary reaction.
I was shaking. I know that I started to cry.
It was last seen at one of the nightclubs called the Pavilion.
But I was just so stunned, shocked, and really surprised because he's telling me about this missing person who then just starts to appear right in front of my face. There is a person coming in, and she came right through for me.
Immediately, Vicki gets a powerful image of Amy.
She's exclaiming that her name is Amy, gray sweatshirt, writing on the side. I kept asking her, what does that say? And she said, Pratt Whitney. And that was where she worked at the time. Okay.
For the psychic, it can mean only one thing.
Okay. My first response was that sick feeling in my stomach always usually happens when I know somebody's passed away. So immediately there was a feeling of, or a sense of, this girl's passed.
Monroe tells Lachlan Amy is dead. And then she goes a step farther.
I knew this is a murder case.
And he's really not prepared for what she tells him next.
Okay, she keeps repeating, Amy's repeating
JJJ. It's definitely the name of the man that killed me.
In Portland, Maine, 25-year-old Amy St. Laurent has been missing for 5 days. Is she alive? Has she been abducted? Where is she? The police are stumped. Desperate for clues, Lieutenant Joe Lachlan asks Vicki Monroe, a local radio personality and psychic, for help. Monroe has a terrifying vision of Amy. She's dead, the victim of a brutal murder, and something more.
I saw Amy. She described the gentleman.
His name is Jeff.
It's definitely the name of the man that killed me.
Jeff. That's what Amy's saying.
And he killed her.
She got into a vehicle with...
New evidence has revealed that the last person to see Amy was a man by the name of Jeff Gorman. No one but the police has that information.
I mean, it was uncanny. It was uncanny information, no doubt. It starts a conversation. It starts a dialogue. It starts rethinking. It starts discussion and argument, which is good for the case, because that's what we constantly do. Most cases start with a crime scene and some place to start. Here, we are trying to find a starting place. And ultimately, we found that starting place with Jeffrey Russell Gorman.
While Lieutenant Lachlan heads up the investigation, 2 veteran detectives lead the search for Amy. Scott Heracles from Maine State Police and Danny Young from Portland PD.
Gorman was just the last person known to be with Amy St. Laurent. And at that point, we had to focus on him until we could either clear him or put the case together.
Gorman is hauled in. As he is questioned, Lachlan watches for signs of deception. If the psychic is right, this man knows what happened to Amy.
This guy, then Erica's here on. I don't know. She said that he left her.
Gorman, who wanted to appear very cooperative, was in fact very reluctant. He would come and give you his story, but he wouldn't do anything further.
I played a lot of pool.
Under close questioning by Detective Young, Gorman freely admits meeting Amy at the Pavilion nightclub and taking her to a party at his friend's apartment.
All the time. It's just, we just go back over and drink.
There were 3 people, herself included. They got in the car.
I think that she left with Jeffrey Gorman. Number one, she couldn't find her friend at the time. 2, Gorman knows a lot of people in a position of authority, and bouncers and bar persons and things of that nature, so she might have felt that ephemeral safety with him.
According to Gorman, Amy doesn't stay long at the party and he drives her back downtown.
I pulled up. I did not even put my car in park. Left it in drove. She says, I hope you remember my name. I'll call you tomorrow. All right.
But Gorman's story doesn't stack up.
Across the street from the Pavilion is a jewelry store. So they had a video camera that basically shot out through the glass into the road. We knew what Gorman had for a car, so we looked at the tapes for that time period, and Gorman's car never appeared. So that clearly indicates to us that he's lying.
At the time, he also says that there's a lot of activity here, that bouncers and persons are coming and going from the nightclub. We know that at that time of night that this place is a ghost town.
Police dig into Gorman's background. They find a criminal history that stretches all the way to Florida.
His record included a lot of misdemeanor crimes and thefts and crimes of dishonesty. Knowing his background, going into Florida and Alabama and talking to the individual detectives and people down there, and we got the picture of Russ Gorman, Jeffrey Gorman, as someone we didn't trust, and nothing that he said, nothing that he said we could verify. Yeah, they did. Before leaving, after leaving the pavilion.
Gorman's suspicious behavior after the interview raises other red flags.
He has a piece of crap car that he never cleans, that he's driving around in, that his friend said a couple of days earlier, why don't you clean this thing up? And he says, oh, it's a piece of junk. There's no sense cleaning this car up. And the day after Amy was missing, that car was cleaned up, and it was immaculate. He starts changing his appearance. He shaves his head. He gets body piercings and tattoos. He's making all sorts of inquiries about polygraph and dealing with the police. He refuses to cooperate with us. He was indicating all sorts of what we call post-offense behavior. And we start building a case, starting with the fact that he never dropped her off.
So we've lost a little bit of time in there. I don't know where he went, what he was doing.
Jeff Gorman is now suspect number 1 in the disappearance of Amy St. Laurent, just as psychic Vicki Monroe predicted.
I don't know if he was back.
It was definitely Jeff. That is the name they had to go with. And I see it, yes, I see it.
But the psychic has even more powerful visions. Amy is showing Vicki where they can find her.
Then she shows me this area. It was wooded, very, very wooded.
I can hear water.
There's water. I could hear water. She also described that there was a house nearby that was significant to this Jeff person.
I am very near his home.
Police know Jeff Gorman often stays at his mother's house, located outside Portland in a heavily wooded area. New evidence shows he was close by the night Amy disappeared. He was stopped by police for a broken headlight at 2:45 in the morning.
He could only possibly travel in a small radius based on all the information that we had gathered.
This isn't too far from where he was stopped.
We established criteria for search areas. One of the areas is right near Gorman's mother's house, where he lived. We believe that Amy could be somewhere in that area.
Could this area be the dense woodland Monroe sees in her visions? It's 6 weeks since Amy vanished.
There was a huge amount of pressure on the police to solve this crime. First, because we didn't know if this would happen again to another young woman in the Old Port. And also just for her family to know that there was some resolution.
But at that time, it was just Gorman and Cush. This is at the...
The detectives became very attached to her. And in fact, at one point, because of who she was, they were referring to her as our Amy.
Amy was too sweet a girl. She was too good a person. So many of our cases, we're able to reason some of these things away. We still work very hard, but you can reason a lot away so you don't have to take a lot home with you that night. But Amy never left. She came home every night.
Lieutenant Laughlin actually asked me if I would speak to a woman named Diane Jenkins. Well, the names didn't match, so I honestly didn't know who that would be. And it ended up being Amy's mom. Diane came with me and she had a bag with her. And it contained a book and pictures. It was definitely confirmation for me that was Amy. That was the girl that I had seen.
Mrs. Jenkins, what I do is I see people that have passed away, and I can see Amy, and she's right behind you.
The vividness of Amy was very intense. And this time was going to show herself in complete form, right down to her tattoo and her sandals. So her mother would know, this is me. Don't even question this. This is me.
She's wearing a gray.
It was very important that I relay the message to her mother that I love you. You were a wonderful mother. You were all of these great things to me. I felt sad, but I also felt great relief in the respect that her mother knows at least this much, that she's okay and she's not suffering.
But now detectives face another obstacle, Mother Nature.
We had conducted many, many searches, and this was our last big effort.
Police need to work fast. It's early December, and heavy snowfall is in the forecast.
As we started the search in the morning, we were all very anxious to get moving because snow was coming. Snow was imminent. It was going to happen that day.
The snow may have prevented the cadaver dogs from actually indicating on the grave, which then would have been another 4 or 5 months.
Urgency really sums up how we were feeling. We had to find her.
Danny and Scott really believed that we were going to find her. I was just like, man, I don't know how we're going to do it. It's just the proverbial needle in a haystack.
Just as Monroe predicted, police now believe the answer to the mystery of Amy's disappearance lies buried in these woods.
This is very, very familiar territory to Jeffrey Russ Gorman. His mother's house is through the woods here, probably about 4/10 of a mile. These trails he's been through many, many, many times. He's fished these ponds. If you look over here, you can see probably 50 feet from us is water.
For hours, police scour the woods. And then...
Around 2:30 in the afternoon, the search team was walking through this area, and they stepped on an area over here where the earth was soft and determined that it didn't feel right. They backed up and they looked, and they noticed some depression, soft earth, fresh shovel marks.
Could this be what they were looking for?
The dogs first come through here, and they go immediately to this pine tree here, and they alert on the pine tree. From here, they go to this area where there was a grave.
Detective Young takes charge of the crime scene.
I'd taken some tools from my vehicle and dug down a little bit and searched, and I could feel basically an arm, or I could feel skin underneath.
The forensic dig continues late into the night. But is it Amy's body they have found? Has the psychic been right all along?
You need to help me get out. Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
It's December 8th, 2001. For the past 6 weeks, finding Amy St. Laurent has consumed the police in Portland, Maine.
Amy is the type of daughter you'd be proud to have. And I had a daughter, Amy, the same age. It hit home, hit very, very close to home.
Amy is the kind of victim, she's the kind of person we're supposed to protect. She's the reason we come to work. And we had to get it done for her.
Now they may be close. Psychic Vicki Monroe described where to look for her body.
I see a house, there's a house, there's water. I could hear water. It's Jeff.
She also told police the name of the person responsible.
The gentleman that did this to her was Jeff.
Jeff Gorman is the chief suspect in the investigation, but the psychic knows even more.
And then Amy told me that I'm under something. I can't get out.
What does she mean? Police are about to find out.
When we're doing the forensic exhumation, I do remember finding the piece of plywood, and what Vicki had told me resonated at that point, that she was under something.
And when the plywood is removed, a gray Pratt & Whitney sweatshirt, as seen in Monroe's vision, emerges from the damp, dark soil.
At that point, we knew that we had Amy.
From the moment we confirmed, it was very surreal. We were on autopilot immediately. I don't think we needed to sleep again for a couple of days. It was invigorating and a little bit of relief.
It's an emotional moment, a relief, and yet it confirms everyone's worst fear.
I think probably the most difficult part of this case is the day we discovered Amy and finding her remains and going through the forensic dig and exhumation. You know, you have this image of a young lady who had her whole life ahead of her, and, you know, seeing that crime scene was very difficult for all of us.
In the moments that we found her, we got our first snowstorm of the season.
Yep. Leaving the site when the snow started coming down, and it was a substantial storm, too.
We all were just amazed that if it was another day, we never would have found her. And Vicki Monroe had told me that she would be found before the first snow.
And I could see it on television, where they had found Amy and what she was wearing. I do this for a living. This shouldn't be a shock. I thought, oh my God.
How could Vicki Monroe have known so much about this terrible case? Did the spirit of Amy really tell her? Vicki said Amy had been murdered. She said the killer was named Jeff. She predicted he buried Amy under something near water, close to a familiar house. She even knew about the gray sweatshirt.
I don't know how she could possibly have known any of this information.
I don't know if it's just something that I carried with me since I was born. Some people will say I'm cursed, and I say no. This isn't a curse. I feel blessed.
I can't explain it. I think human beings have sixth senses, or I know that I watch detectives develop another sense, another level of intellect or observation, and perhaps that's true.
Whatever the truth behind Monroe's extraordinary insights, the information she passed to police played an important role in finding Amy and her killer.
I think the biggest impact that her statements had on the investigation is that it stimulates conversation, it stimulates discussion, and that begets other information.
One day after Amy is found, police arrest Jeffrey Gorman and charge him with first-degree murder. At his trial, the terrible details of Amy's last night alive are revealed.
We will not know precisely what happened that night, but we believe that the assault started in the car.
After leaving the party, Gorman stops and forces himself on Amy. She resists and he brutally assaults her.
He then takes a gun out and brings her to familiar ground. I believe Amy was taken up this road by force.
Hidden in the forest, under the cover of night, Gorman assaults and rapes Amy. Then, by a pine tree, he shoots her in the head. 2 days later, he returns to bury her next to the pond, covered by a cheap piece of plywood.
I often tell people that this is an unbelievable case. It was an unbelievable experience. It takes a lot out of you and pushes you against the wall. And I don't know how many times you can really handle that in a career, a case like this, one that you cannot afford to lose.
And there's no doubt in my mind that this man would kill again. This guy is serial sexual homicide.
In court, Gorman's own dark words finally seal his fate. Prosecutors present a recording of Gorman's mother admitting to police that her son had confessed to her that he killed Amy. A brutal killer is found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison for the murder of Amy St. Laurent.
Now that we have Jeffrey Russ Gorman behind bars, he will never be able to kill again. And this, to me, is sacred ground.
An innocent ride home takes a gruesome turn.
It was a crime of absolutely no logical reason.
A family's desperate search for their missing brother turns up nothing until a psychic 2,000 miles away tells them where to look.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle.
She had a lot of details. She didn't get them from us. She didn't get them from the media.
But her visions make legal history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
River Ridge, Louisiana, a small town on the banks of the Mississippi River, a suburb of New Orleans.
Pretty much people in River Ridge know each other pretty well. It's just sort of a small slice of American pie type of community. You wouldn't expect a person, particularly a hardworking carpenter, to suddenly disappear.
But in June of 1987, that's exactly what did happen. 27-year-old Andre Daigle vanished without a trace.
My mother called me
Friday morning and told me that Andre was, missing and she hadn't heard from him. We're a close-knit family and very tight, and Andre wouldn't leave the pets without food or water, for one. And the other thing is, generally somebody would hear from him on a daily basis.
Andre's older brother Chris contacts the police immediately, but they're not convinced there's a problem and are slow to act.
The fact that he was a 27-year-old grown man, the police were like, what makes you think he's missing?
But the family believes something is very wrong and begin their own investigation, retracing his last steps.
Are you sure you haven't seen this guy?
The night he disappeared, he and Nick Shelley went to have dinner together, and then they went out to Mitchell's to shoot some pool.
Andre and his best friend Nick were playing pool for beers. Loser buys. Andre lost the first game, and at the bar he met a young woman who called herself Thelma.
And they chit-chatted, just making small talk, just both being patrons in there. When I talked to Nick about it, he tells me that he felt that she seemed to kind of hide her face, so he really didn't get a good look at her. It was a bit odd, but, that's just something you don't think about. I mean, these are the things you think about later, after they played a few games and had a few drinks. They were getting ready to leave, and that's when Thelma asked Andre for a ride home.
Andre agreed, and Nick Shelley went home separately in his own car. It's the last time he will ever see his best friend. 4 days pass, and nothing. 2,000 miles away in California, Andre's sister Elise is desperate to help. A friend suggests she visit a psychic.
When she came to see me, Elise told me she had a brother that was missing. I just asked her if she brought a picture of her brother and a map with her. And she said yes.
Rosemary Kerr lives in Escondido, California. She claims she has a special talent for finding missing people. She'll need it. She's never been to Louisiana and never met the Daigle family.
When I go to the picture, I don't need to look at it because the minute I put my fingers on it, I get vibrations. So my fingers, say it's like somebody reading Braille. I'm making my connection. Everybody else is out.
The connection Rosemary makes is immediate and profound.
As I'm touching the picture, I'm seeing all these things behind my eyes. I was telling Elise how I see her brother in his dark vehicle, and she denied this. She says, no, he drives the little white car. But I needed to go with the dark car because this is what Andre was showing me.
Elise is not aware that her brother has recently bought a new vehicle, a black Ford pickup.
When Elise said, oh, no, he has got a white car, I thank God that I had myself programmed that I do not listen to anybody else but only what comes in, whether it's right or wrong. I cannot change that.
Now Rosemary focuses on the map of Louisiana.
And as I run my finger along the maps, my fingers tell me where to stop. It's a vibration in my fingers. And I stopped, and I opened my eyes, and I asked Elise, I says, Elise, do you know this place? Do you recognize this? Right in here. And she says, this is Slidell. She says, I know it. I says, if you know this place, you have to do it now, do it quick. This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle and find out where he is.
Slidell is 30 miles from the Daigle home in River Ridge. Chris and the family had just arrived back after a full day of searching. They were not prepared for what would happen next.
We were all in the kitchen with the maps laid out, trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to go tomorrow? What are we going to do? That's when the phone rang, and my mother got the call from Elise.
I just had a reading with a psychic here. And
she says, the lady says to go to Slidell. Well, man, when she said that, everybody in the room just got shook. You could feel goosebumps, and it was like the spirit had walked through there and touched you on the shoulder just to let you know, this is real. You got to go.
Within minutes, Chris and his family are racing towards Slidell, guided, they believe, by the spirit of their missing brother.
They went out in their vehicles to look for Andre. I told them to talk to Andre. And Elise said, why? I says, I want the open connection.
So we did, we knew he was frightened. We didn't know if he was alive or not. And we just wanted to reach out to him, and let him know that, his family was there. So
Then, incredibly, there on the interstate, Chris spots Andre's truck ahead. The black pickup is heading towards Slidell, exactly where the psychic said it would be.
I actually kind of passed the truck up at first. You know, I didn't even expect to see it, really, but drove up. Hey, was that it? Sure enough, that was it. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the, driver's seat and who was in there driving it.
How could a psychic 2,000 miles away know where to find Andre's truck? But where is Andre, and who's at the wheel? In River Ridge, Louisiana, the mysterious disappearance of 27-year-old Andre Daigle has his family searching everywhere. 5 days pass without any success. Then, a California psychic 2,000 miles away points them in the right direction.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you'll find your brother's vehicle.
And sure enough, going down the interstate on our way to Slidell, and there was the truck. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the, driver's seat and who was in there driving it. So we decided at that point that we'd just kind of stick with them and see where they led us.
Chris tails the truck for nearly 30 minutes. Suddenly, the truck veers off the interstate and leads them down a deserted side road.
And there's no lights. It was pitch black out there. So I'm kind of sitting back about, 50, 60 feet from where they were. Didn't want to get too close, but we wanted to stay close enough that if they left or did anything, we were there. They turned the truck around, facing back towards us, and then they killed the motor and turned the lights on. Well, that was very spooky, because now we knew that they knew we were following them. They drove by real slow and just kind of checked us out and looked at us, And as they got by, they took off. We had just drove down that road not seconds before, and it was empty. Here we are 30 seconds later, we go down the same road, and who do we see? A police car.
As luck would have it, they ran across the only patrol car in the Pearl River area, parked alongside the road that they were on.
We're all yelling, "Yeah, get that truck. Man, this is my brother. That's his truck. He's missing. You got to stop these guys." And that's when we got into a high-speed chase.
When police forced the truck to pull over, they believe they're investigating a stolen vehicle. As police search the truck, they find both guns and ammunition.
We didn't care about them. We didn't care about the truck. We didn't care about anything. We just wanted to know where was Andre. So I kind of walked up a little bit closer, and I asked him, I said, "Where's my brother? What'd you do with my brother? Where is he?" Well, of course, they wouldn't answer.
But where is Andre? 2,000 miles away in California, psychic Rosemary Kerr believes she knows the answer.
When I felt myself holding my head and basically speaking louder and louder and louder because I could feel the pain, and I started yelling to Elise, "My head is killing me." And as I felt that, I went into, I want to say, a different mode, because I knew that I was looking for somebody that had already left the earth plane.
But Rosemary withholds this piece of information.
Elise did not ask if her brother was alive or dead. I am just the conductor of the words. I'm just a channel. But in order for it to be done the proper way, it has to go through the proper channels. It's for the authorities.
And the authorities were working fast. They identified the two men as 24-year-old Charles Gervais of New Orleans and 21-year-old Michael Phillips of Kenner. The two are brought in on weapons and stolen vehicle charges.
These two were not new to crime.
Captain James Gallagher of the Kenner Police Department is one of the officers in charge of the investigation.
The chief and his officers began interviewing Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips as to how they came in possession of the truck.
At first, Gervais isn't talking, but under questioning, his friend Michael Phillips eventually cracks. He describes a senseless, brutal murder, a murder committed, he says, by Gervais.
Once Charles realized that Mike was talking to the authorities, he demanded to speak to him, wanted to get the record straight. They talked about how they had Andre brought back to their apartment with Thelma. At some point they retrieve a claw hammer out of Andre's truck. Then they take turns beating him with his own claw hammer.
The killer's motive was more extraordinary than even the police could have imagined.
The question was asked, why would you kill Andre? What was the purpose behind it? And Gervais tells me this story about hearing about a prostitution ring somewhere in Texas. And him and Mike decide, well, we don't want to work for a living. We'll just go to Texas and we'll kill whoever's running this operation and we'll take it over and the women will work for us. So they decide, well, if we're going to do this, we have to know before we get involved that we can actually take a life. So they come up with the scheme of sending Thelma out to bars and to look for someone, anyone, whoever she brings home, that person's going to die. And unfortunately, in this case, the person she brought home was Andre.
Andre Daigle was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, picked at random and killed as a dress rehearsal for a gangland hit, his body dumped in a swamp.
Gervais showed no remorse. He wasn't sorry that he did anything. Didn't bother him, that he had destroyed a family, and taken away someone's son.
Once police recover the body, both men are charged with first-degree murder and a warrant goes out for their accomplice, 21-year-old Thelma Horn of Kenner. Now police have to inform the family of their worst fear. Their youngest son, Andre, is dead.
I never dreamed he would be dead. We needed to believe he was alive. We needed to believe that we could find him. We needed to believe that, that we could help him. And so we really thought we were. We thought we were going to find him alive. I thought we were, but it didn't work out that way. But at least we were able to find him and find the people who committed the crime.
But this case is far from over. Even with a confession, both men could still plead not guilty in court.
If the defendant doesn't take the stand and doesn't testify on his own behalf, you cannot use his statement against him.
In Louisiana, a not guilty plea can lead to the death penalty. Gervais sees the writing on the wall, admits his guilt, and is sentenced to life in prison. But Thelma Horn and Michael Phillips roll the dice. They plead not guilty and opt for a trial.
I think Michael was more concerned about consequences. He knew that we already pretty much had the whole story of what occurred, but he wanted to try and downplay his participation.
Gallagher needs as much evidence as possible. When he learns from Chris that it was a psychic's vision that led them to Andre's truck and exposed their killers, he reluctantly gives her a call.
I deal with facts. I deal with things, tangible things. And up until that point, I was still trying to figure out, what the angle was. How did this happen?
Hello?
It was a phone call that would change a cop and make courtroom history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
In Louisiana, the disappearance of a 27-year-old carpenter, Andre Daigle, has ended in murder. A California psychic has helped the Daigle family and police track down the killers. Now the police must work with a psychic to make sure the suspects are locked away forever.
Well, I learned that the way these people were actually caught was a tip from a psychic, a lady named Rosemary Kerr, who lived in California.
When Captain Gallagher contacts Rosemary, she recounts the details of her reading with Andre's sister.
So I come into Andre's vibration, getting more and more headaches coming in very, very strongly.
Well, she was talking about, I'm feeling pain to my head right now as I'm handling his photograph. I already knew from the investigation that Andre had been beaten with a hammer.
The The autopsy revealed that Andre had been struck 10 times in the head.
She talks about where the body's at and where Andre's at.
I could see and also feel a freeway or a roadway that was to my right and high above me. I knew there was a railroad track to the other side. I knew there was marshes there. The number 7 kept coming in and coming in very strongly.
When Gallagher travels back to the location where Daigle's body was found, he's amazed at the psychic's accuracy.
We got off on exit number 7 right down the road to get here. As Rose told me during my interview with her, she described a long bridge, and what we have behind me here is Interstate 55, which runs for about 24 miles, elevated through the swamp. She indicated there'd be water all around Andre. Well, here we are, next to the swamp here. She had a lot of details that no other way she could have gotten them. She didn't get them from us. She didn't get them from the media, and it just, I was amazed, but I became a believer after talking with her.
He was kind of flabbergasted because he had never worked with a psychic before, and he wanted to know how I knew all these things. But what was so lovely about him, he's accepted me for who I was. He questioned me very, very thoroughly, wanting to know how I work and how I know it. And though I could feel skepticism at first, he, as we talked and talked and talked, he accepted the fact because he was able to verify the information that was given to him.
You have to be a believer because there's no explanation for what she gave him other than that she has a gift.
But could a psychic's visions hold up in a court of law? W.J. LeBlanc, a Louisiana district attorney, thinks Rosemarie's testimony is key.
When I first took the case, I really didn't have an expectation that the psychic would testify. I read through the file. It was almost too fantastic to believe in terms of what role she played in the apprehension of these individuals. But I did want to meet her to verify that that is exactly what happened, which was what was in the report. When I met with her and we discussed exactly what she did and how it did, I realized how compelling it was and that the jury really needed to hear it. The jury needed to hear why the family left River Ridge and drove to Slidell and how they just happened to run across their missing family member's truck with the killers in it. From an evidentiary standpoint, there were some people in the office who were skittish about using a psychic during a trial. My position was that she was a fact witness, and based upon what she saw, someone else relayed that information to someone else, which led to the arrest of the defendants.
The brutal and bizarre murder of Andre Daigle makes front-page news, but what really grabs headlines is the psychic.
This case, in many ways, was sort of a bellwether case in establishing psychic involvement as an important forensic tool in conducting investigations in cases that were very difficult.
Richard Boyd was the court reporter at the Daigle trial.
In my 10 years of covering courts, it was the most amazing, astounding chain of circumstances that I ever ran across.
It would be the first time in U.S. legal history that a psychic would take the stand and describe how her visions helped to solve a murder.
Well, I had never been on a witness stand, and I would be the first in doing this work as a psychic testifying, but I didn't feel any qualms, no pressures or anything. It felt like it was the normal thing to do.
February 2nd, 1988, 1 year after the murder, the state presents its case to a packed courtroom. W.J. LeBlanc, the DA, outlines for the jury the gruesome details of Andre Daigle's last hours. On the night of June 9th, 1987, Andre Daigle was playing pool with his best friend, Nick Shelley. At the bar, he meets a young woman, Thelma Horn. She later asks for a lift home. Inside the apartment, Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips ambush Andre, attacking him with a hammer taken from a toolbox in his truck. Their botched murder finally ended when the two men used a vacuum cord to strangle Andre to death. They wrapped his body in a curtain and hid him in the back of a couch. The following night, they dumped his body in a swampy marsh below the causeway. The evidence against the two men is compelling. Now the DA calls the psychic to the witness stand to help seal the prosecution case.
You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. I mean, people were just enraptured by it, just totally focused on her.
Thank you. There's an old
Rosemary Kerr tells the jury how her vision led the Daigles to Andre's missing truck.
You know, the emotion, it was just a chill went through the room.
At the close of the state's case, faced with the evidence, Michael Phillips changes his plea to guilty.
He was headed straight for the electric chair. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury was hanging on every word of every witness, from Rosemary to Chris Daigle to Nick Shelley. Even someone as slow as Michael Phillips, I think, could sense that this was heading to the direction where he was not going to like.
Without that information provided by Rose, which eventually led to the arrest, he would have been possibly another John Doe, unsolved homicide.
In a separate trial, the killer's accomplice Thelma Horn is found guilty of second-degree murder. With the help of the psychic's testimony, all three are serving life sentences.
That was the first time that a psychic had ever testified in a criminal trial. And to my knowledge, I don't think that one ever has testified since. It was a fairly unique set of circumstances that led to her testifying in the trial. Because Andre Daigle was a very special young man, and there was just this feel about the trial that everything was coming together to see that Andre's killers were brought to justice. And I think that Rosemary's testimony was a big part of that.
I feel that this whole scenario wasn't in our hands, but in a higher power, and we all just did our job. And I have to give credit to the departments that work with people like me and realize if we can give them just one little piece of the puzzle, and that could help them, that's what we're about.
The Daigle family was devastated. To this day, is still devastated to a large extent by this senseless crime. Andre Daigle, a promising young man who was hardworking, lost his life for absolutely no reason, for no discernible, clear reason.
Andre was a great brother. You know, if you ever needed his help, he was there for you. You know, he was just a wonderful guy, thoughtful, kind, gentle. You know, after the funeral, people would just walk up to me, you know, guys we went to high school with, you know. I mean, if there weren't 100 guys came to me and said, Andre was my best friend. I'm going to miss Andre. He was my best friend. I mean, he was everybody's best friend, you know. I mean, that's quite impressive, you know, to hear that from people. You know, his life was cut so short, I don't know if he had time to even figure that out. Here's Rosemary, you know, a little lady living out there in California, you know, 2,000 miles away from us. Think that someone has that ability, you know, to make contact and into the spirit world like that and able to help, but she's connected.
In southern Louisiana, someone is killing the elderly. A psychic 4,000 miles away says she can see the killer.
I saw that he was wearing gloves and that he was very anxious, and he was looking for a way to get in.
They knew they were getting beaten, and they knew they were going to die.
It was horrific, the manner in which he beat and killed human beings.
There was a lot of fear going around a community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim.
Can a psychic's paranormal insights help police stop a psychopath before he kills again? Ascension Parish, a small slice of Cajun country deep in southern Louisiana. Within the parish, the small city of Gonzales, a peaceful community of friends and neighbors that prides itself on being the jambalaya capital of the world. It's a place where no one worries about keeping the doors locked at night. But in April of 1997, that peace was shattered.
So I was on duty at the time and heard a report over the radio of a possible homicide that occurred within the city of Gonzales.
Police are shocked to discover that Lillian Philippe, a 71-year-old widow, has been brutally murdered in her home. It's the first homicide victim in Gonzales in 11 years.
It's so beyond what you expect that when a situation like that happens, it just goes beyond your range of feelings there.
She was scheduled to go on a church bus trip to a casino about an hour and a half drive away. And she was very prompt all the time. If she said she was going to be at 8 o'clock, she was there at 7:45. She did not show up.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry is one of the first to arrive at the crime scene.
She was on the floor and at the foot of her bed. It's obvious that a knife was used in the attack. There were noticeable stab wounds and some defensive wounds on her hands. There was very little trace evidence that was left at the scene.
The coroner on the case, Alfredo Suarez, is unsettled by the brutality of the killing.
She sustained multiple stab wounds to the neck area. Both jugular veins were severed by the deep stab wounds to that area. Furthermore, the larynx was partially severed, as well as the right lobe of the thyroid gland. In essence, she bled to death, and at the time, in that town of Gonzales, this was a horrifying death because the people in that town are not used to this kind of violent, brutal, bloody death.
Miss Lillian's death caused a lot of concern because their quiet neighborhoods were now infiltrated with someone who had committed a murder. I mean, there was a lot of fear going around the community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim.
But what the people of Gonzales don't know is even more terrifying. The death of Lillian Philippe is the third murder committed in the past 6 months along the airline highway. A highway that cuts through Ascension Parish, connecting Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Victor Rossi, the first victim, was beaten to death with a baseball bat. The second, Barbara Bourgeois, was stabbed to death.
Every time something like that happens, you lose a little bit of your innocence. And yes, it certainly we certainly lost our innocence during these events here.
3 bodies in 6 months. Each victim was elderly and attacked in their own home, but police are stuck.
But we were running into dead ends. It seemed like every suspect we may have come up with was eliminated.
Then Chief Landry receives a telephone call that will alter the course of the investigation.
I had received a call from a high school classmate of mine, Marcia.
Marcia lives in Honolulu, Hawaii. She is the niece of Lillian Philippe. She asks Chief Landry to consult with her friend Rose Kopp, a psychic.
It was suggested to him that I might be able to help.
Marcia had some concerns because they didn't know if the possibility if it was just a group of friends, the families that were friends together. They didn't know who was a target. She was concerned for the welfare of her family and just the welfare of Miss Lillian, to want to know if we were able to detect who had committed the crime.
Frustrated with the case, Chief Landry is willing to try anything, even a psychic.
I told him that I had worked on cases before and that I might be able to identify to some degree the perpetrator of the crime and might be able to offer some clues or hints into the investigation. I asked Chief Landry to send me a photograph of the victim and a small personal item of hers. And the photographs of people actually tell me things. I look into the eyes, and it's a matter that transcends physical reality. Once I see a person's photograph and touch an object that belongs to them, I'm able to connect better with the target.
But before the photo reaches Hawaii, the killer strikes again, this time a double homicide. Once again, the airline highway, just down the road from the home of Lillian Philippe. Seniors Sam and Luella Arcuri have been bludgeoned to death in their home. Then 5 days later, another killing. Joan Brock, 55, is beaten to death in her backyard. All signs point to a serial killer stalking the most helpless citizens of Ascension Parish. Although the body count is rising fast, police have very little information. The crime scene reveals nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA. In Honolulu, Rose Kopp is already on the case. Like a shaman or a medicine man, Rose enters a trance where she claims to be able to travel to the scene of the crime.
Shamanic journey is a trance that's induced by repetitive sound, slowly by just focusing on the sound of it. Your brain waves alter, and you feel very light. So I move out of body, flew over Diamond Head, over the Pacific Ocean. My intention was to go to Miss Lillian's house. I flew over California, Texas, and went to Louisiana, and I ended up standing in the carport, and I turned around and I looked over my right shoulder, and there was so much blood all over the place.
What Rose Kopp sees is shocking, but is it enough to find Lillian Philippe's killer? It's 1997, and the sleepy southern town of Gonzales, Louisiana, has been rocked by the brutal murder of 71-year-old widow Lillian Philippe.
It just goes beyond your range of feeling.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry has connected the killing to 5 others in the area.
I mean, there was a lot of fear going around a community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim. And you had to really keep everybody happy and make sure that they saw patrol cars and they saw officers around. And so it was the assurance that we had to give as a law enforcement community, had to give the public to know that they could still be safe in a community that was stricken with a serial murderer.
Police have few clues, but Chief Landry has made a connection of the most unusual kind. Rose Kopp, a psychic thousands of miles away in Hawaii, claims to be able to see the killer.
I saw that he was wearing gloves, and his hands were in fists, and so I got the kinesthetic impression that he was very anxious, and he was looking for a way to get in.
Gloves would explain the lack of fingerprints found at the crime scene.
I saw him as a Caucasian male, and about 5'9", and he had brown hair. He was very strong. So he went around to the side of the house, and I saw him move a wrought iron chair from the porch area and move that on top of the air conditioning vent and then stand up on it. And then it stopped. My vision stopped.
And the first thing she told me was that he placed a chair on top of an air conditioning unit and actually climbed onto the roof of the home.
Chief Landry is stunned by what Rose tells him. There is no way she could have known about that chair.
Entrance was apparently gained through a vent through the roof of the house, and then ultimately entered the residence through attic stairs.
He was like a snake, like an anaconda, or those snakes that wrap around you. And he just seized on her and was stabbing her in the neck, in the throat, and there was so much blood all over the place. And I recall her trying to get him off of her, and she couldn't. He was too wiry and strong. She couldn't get him off her. And I just saw all the blood all over the pillow and on the bed.
Somehow Rose Kopp has seen details of the crime scene known only to police. With the pressure mounting, local authorities team up, creating a joint task force to oversee the investigation.
The task force was composed of St. John, the Sheriff's Department, St. James, Ascension Parish Sheriff's Department, and the City of Gonzales to try and collect all information.
District Attorney Charles Long monitors the task force.
The task force thought it wise to consult the FBI Child Abduction and Serial Killer Unit in Quantico, Virginia. After the FBI profiling was done, it was learned that all of the crimes, both in St. John, St. James, and Ascension and City of Gonzales, were probably done by a single killer.
Now, certain he's dealing with a serial killer, Chief Landry once again contacts Rose Kopp.
And he asked me if I would go back and see what his motives were, if I could give a more detailed description of him.
Rose takes another shamanic journey to the crime scene.
I flew over to Louisiana again, and I landed by Miss Lillian's house. And I turned around and I looked over my right shoulder, and the dark-colored sedan was there. I moved inside the car, and I noticed on the floor of the car were gambling slips, lots of papers and betting slips and things like that.
Amazingly, Rose's vision matches with what investigators believe is fueling the killing spree.
We thought that robbery was the motive. There was no other reason to consider why someone would prey upon Miss Philippi. We knew from other cases that there was some large amount of money missing, which we felt might be for a gambling habit.
Rose also says she sees someone new, the killer's girlfriend.
And I saw her in a place serving food. So I realized she was a waitress, so I looked to see her name tag. And I wasn't sure if it was Brandy or Cindy or Candy. And then I wanted to know where the restaurant was where she worked. So I looked out the window. I'm invisible all this time, and I looked out the window, and I saw a fairly large building. And I smelled blood. And then suddenly I saw a severed cow's head. And it shocked me so badly that I came back immediately into my body. I was back in my living room. I don't even recall traveling back.
It's a bizarre psychic vision that transcends space and time, but it makes sense to Chief Landry.
Right off the top of my head, I knew exactly what she was talking about. It was a slaughterhouse. It was a regional slaughterhouse for cattle. And they had a big cow that stood up on top of a sign.
The slaughterhouse Rose can see was torn down years ago.
I mean, I got officers who didn't know that that sign existed at one time or another. I do remember it because as a kid I remember the slaughterhouse. And when she said, "I see a cow on a sign," it was right off the top of my head. I knew exactly what she was talking about.
But it's the psychic's final vision that will blow the case wide open.
And then I saw an old woman's hand, and I knew it was an old woman's hand because it was veiny and the skin, the knuckles were wrinkly. And she wrote, River Rat.
River Rat. What could it mean? And how is it connected to the case?
River rat is a term that we would use for people who live along the Mississippi River corridor. Or when you get into different sections of South Louisiana, the slang, the accent is a little different, and you're able to tell where people are from based on their accent.
Chief Landry may know what a river rat is, but what he doesn't know is what it means for the case. That is, until the killer strikes again.
There was a couple that was attacked outside our jurisdiction around the July 4th weekend. The suspect entered the home through a utility room window, armed himself with a weapon of opportunity inside the home, shot the female in the facial area, and shot the husband in the chest area.
The elderly couple barely survived the attack, but their description of their assailant is what shocks Chief Landry.
And they asked Miss Joyce if she had any description of the suspect, and she wrote on a piece of paper, River Rat.
Gonzales police now know they are hunting for a river rat, but can they catch him before he strikes again?
There was something going on besides robbery. He woke them up in the middle of the night. They knew they were getting beaten, and they knew they were going to die.
A serial killer is on the loose in Ascension Parish, Louisiana. 6 elderly victims have been murdered, including 71-year-old Lillian Philippe. Though police believe robbery is the motive, they're disturbed by the viciousness of the attacks.
You've got your whole community in fear of who's next. When you go into somebody's house, that's man's house is his castle. And when you're robbing the castle and killing the king and the queen, you got a problem. From the sheriff's department's point of view, from the district attorney's point of view, trying to prosecute somebody and bring them to justice and trying to calm the community. So I would say in my years of 15 years as a prosecutor, that was some of the worst. We've had some other disputes, but nothing of this magnitude.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry is working on the case alongside psychic Rose Kopp.
And then I saw an old woman's hand, and she wrote, River Rat.
The latest victim has survived the killer's assault. She gives police a physical description of her attacker and also describes him as a river rat, slang for people who live along the Mississippi corridor. Now, using the FBI profile and the victim's description, police create a composite of the suspect and release it to the public. Again, Chief Landry is struck by the accuracy of the psychic's visions.
The description Rose had given me was very, very close in the physical features to the composite we ultimately got.
Only 5 days after the composite is released, there's a major break in the case.
There was someone who came forward to say, look, I know this guy. He's been spending a lot of money in a casino.
The witness identifies a resident of Gonzales, a man named Daniel Blank.
When you gamble, you have that little cord you put in a slot machine, or it tracks not only your earnings, but your losses also. It tells you how much you spent as compared to how much you've actually won.
And they gathered substantial information about, $80,000, $100,000 worth of gambling that he was doing at all of these casinos.
And you compare that with what you thought his salary would be for a self-employed mechanic, and it just didn't add up. Then you look at what associations Daniel may have had with each victim, and there was some relationship with auto parts, maybe a friend of the family. Everything just started really funneling right toward Daniel Blank.
Police go looking for Daniel Blank at his last known address.
task force decided that, well, we're going to pick him up for questioning. He's got some, we checked on his earnings and his losses at the casino. He's going to have to show us some paperwork as to where these finances came from. We began looking for him and learned that he had ultimately just recently had moved to Onalaska, Texas. And so we contacted the authorities in Onalaska and sent our task force to Texas to further the investigation.
In Onalaska, Texas, investigators find Daniel Blank and question him about the murders.
It was a very long interview. I think it was approximately a 12-hour interview. And when he finally began to confess, of course, they went through each one of the crimes that were committed in detail, like a separate mini interview within the 12-hour interview.
And that's when I hit her with it. With what? With the thing, whatever it was, I had in my hand.
During his interrogation, Daniel Blank admits to all 6 murders, including that of Lillian Philippe. Police also pick up the mysterious Cindy from Rose's visions.
We discovered Cindy and learned that Cindy was actually Daniel Blank's girlfriend. And Cindy was the one Rose saw in the waitress outfit. Cindy worked at a little cafe. Daniel would frequent the cafe because there were video poker machines, gambling machines, and Daniel would, and I feel that's how Rose saw Cindy, but when she saw Cindy, Daniel would have been right inside gambling. So she actually saw them both there, but she only read Cindy's name, I think.
Police learn Cindy waitresses across the street from the site of the old Slaughterhouse, just as Rose had envisioned. His girlfriend, Cindy Bellard, is released after making a deal to cooperate with prosecutors. In his confession, Blank reveals the brutal details of his murder of Lillian Philippe. After using the wrought iron chair to gain access to the home, Daniel Blank attacked the elderly widow with a trophy, then stabbed her to death with a kitchen knife.
Daniel Blank, in his confession, indicated he stole approximately $100 from Miss Lillian Philippe's house. My conclusion was there was something going on besides robbery in the manner in which he beat people. He woke them up in the middle of the night, first of all. If you look at it, they knew they were getting beaten, and they knew they were going to die. And for some reason, I feel he wanted them to know that they were going to get beaten to death. Because other than that, you could have just simply went in, stole what you wanted, and leave out. Or there were more humane ways. If you're going to kill somebody, there are more humane ways than to beat them with a baseball bat, beat them with a trophy, slice them with a knife, beat them with a briar hook, chop them up, or whatever he's trying to do.
2 years after the crime, on September 2nd, 1999, a jury finds Daniel Blank guilty of the first-degree murder of Lillian Philippe. He is sentenced to death.
The main factor to me was that he was taken off the streets. He was not going to harm anyone else, so that was satisfaction.
Despite being over 4,000 miles away in Honolulu, Hawaii, somehow Rose Kopp was able to tell investigators in Gonzales, Louisiana, remarkable details that at the time only the killer could have known. He did use a chair to break into Lillian's home. His girlfriend was a waitress named Cindy, and his appearance matches Rose's physical description of the killer. He had a gambling problem, and he was a river rat. For Ascension Parish, the conviction of Daniel Blank returns a sense of peace. For the family of Lillian Philippe, it means justice. And for Rose Kopp, it means vindication for the psychic powers even she finds inexplicable.
I'm surprised, happy, exhilarated, satisfied. I love catching bad guys.
Not to say that Rose had everything signed, sealed, and delivered, but I think Rose's journeys did aid us to ultimately get the right guy.
In Malvern, Arkansas, the son of a local police investigator is abducted at knife point.
I thought that somebody that I had either arrested or busted was getting back at me in some way.
But a massive manhunt fails to find him.
The first 24 hours are crucial because the longer it goes, the consequences are always worse.
His parents, desperate to save their son, ask a psychic for help.
She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
Can the psychic help to find Tyson before it's too late?
He was going to kill Tyson.
Malvern, Arkansas, a town of 9,000, is home to the world's largest brick factory. It's also home to 17-year-old Tyson Eford. A typical teenager in his last year of high school, he's passionate about basketball and his pickup truck. To pay for his first set of wheels, he also works part-time on the night shift at the local food center. His shift on November 14th, 1991 begins like any other, until a man approaches Tyson and says that his beloved pickup has been hit in the parking lot. Telling the manager he'll be right back, Tyson follows the man out to investigate. He never returns. 30 minutes later, when the manager sees that Tyson's truck is still parked in the lot, he calls the police, and the police call Tyson's parents, Anita, a probation officer, and Henry Eford, a county sheriff.
We get to the parking lot, and his truck and his school books and stuff are still there. I knew something had happened because he thought more of that truck than he did anything in the world, you know.
The next morning, Malvern wakes up to one of the largest manhunts in Arkansas history.
All law enforcement in Hot Spring County, Malvern, the city, the county, the state, everybody was out looking for him.
Chuck Hefner is the lead investigator for the Arkansas State Police.
When you have a father, no matter where he works, involved, you have to keep some distance. We did not cut him out because it's his family. He wants to be involved, and he's a police officer.
But the investigation has few leads, except for the night manager's sketchy description of the man he saw with Tyson, and another witness who saw a scuffle in the parking lot. The Eford's only son has simply vanished.
They were hunting, they were looking, and I couldn't get no feedback. No feedback. None. It's just like somebody had come in and taken him off the earth.
2 days pass, and police fail to uncover a single new clue. His abduction is a complete mystery.
I think even the police even thought that there would be a ransom call in, but there wasn't.
I didn't feel like it would ever be a ransom. I felt like that it was revenge against me. In fact, deep down, I just knew that I would find him dead.
You'll always look for a child that's alive. That's what you're looking for. You hope you don't find the other, but that's not what you're looking for until there is some evidence to point you in that direction. And we didn't have anything to point us in that direction, so we were still looking for Tyson to be alive somewhere.
Just bring my son home or tell me where I can go get him anywhere, anything that you want.
But with no evidence, the odds of finding Tyson alive are fading by the hour.
At that point, the parent was more than police officer. I would have done anything, to get my son back.
I love him. He is our only son.
Then, out of desperation, Anita Eford's brother makes a suggestion.
I love him.
And I said, who's Carol Payton? He said, she's a psychic in Little Rock. He said, I've used her a couple of times. And I said, yes. I said, you do whatever you need to do. Get her down here. And I said, yes, of course, I'll help. But I need some things from him in order to touch into him, to find out what's happened to him.
Carol Pate learned as a young girl she had a psychic gift for finding missing people. Since then, she's been involved in hundreds of investigations.
I use psychometry. That is touching a photograph of an individual or of a place, or handwriting and ink, touching that. And it's like tuning in a radio station. I see what they see. I feel what they feel. I think what they're thinking primarily.
3 days after Tyson's disappearance, Carol Pate drives from Little Rock to Malvern to meet the Efords.
She wanted something of his that was personal, that no one else had worn or touched or really anything. And I said, well, I've got a shoe. And she said, yes, I can focus in on him. Do you have a recent picture of him? So they brought me a photograph, and they brought me his shoe, and I sat down at the table, and I quietly touched into both. And the first thing that I got was he was alive. Tyson's alive. That was wonderful.
But Carol also tells Anita she is visualizing the whole abduction, just as Tyson had experienced it.
I saw the whole thing immediately. I saw the men, I saw the man in camouflage, I saw the truck. It happened very quickly.
Now Carol asks Anita to take her to the crime scene.
I got in touch with Henry, and I told him that I had Carol with me, and we met him at the parking lot.
Henry Eford's conscience is torn. As a cop, he deals in hard evidence. As a father, he's willing to try anything.
I get Tyson coming out of the front of the store at the parking lot. I got a better visual of the abductors. I got a better visual of the way they went out and how they grabbed him and how they forced him into the truck. There's a man that grabs him, the man that told him that the truck had been hit. He throws him inside the truck.
I call myself a halfway decent investigator. I'm getting information that nobody else had ever got. We didn't even know which direction he had went in, other than he'd went out the back of the parking lot.
They drive. They went that way, right out through the back, and to the left.
Will the psychic's visions turn out to be true and help Tyson's family find him before it's too late? In Malvern, Arkansas, a massive search has failed to find 17-year-old kidnap victim Tyson Eford. After 2 frustrating days of no leads, his parents ask psychic Carol Pate to help them find their son. At the crime scene, the parking lot of a local grocery store, Carol has a vision that Tyson is still alive. She claims she can even see where his abductors have taken him.
They went that way, and they turned left.
She said something to me about, I'll see a ridge. And I thought maybe she was talking about a mountain or a ridge or hill or something. And she said, no, it's a road. And I said, there's a ridge road.
Yes, that's it, Ridge Road. They took him down Ridge Road. They don't live far from Ridge Road. They took him to a house.
Tyson's father, a county sheriff, asks Carol to lead him to the location where she believes his son is being held.
And it was like I was following a trail of energy. And I started getting the details on the house. The house was small, white. It didn't look like a house. It looked different.
And she carried me straight down. We hit the end of the blacktop and went into the gravel.
The energy stopped.
and I couldn't tell which way to go.
And she told me, she said, I've lost it.
But it was like there was a wall there, and I couldn't go any farther. And we weren't supposed to go any farther.
Despite Carol's frustrating psychic dead end, Henry and Anita are convinced she holds the key to finding their boy.
This was the first information that we had gotten.
Nobody was coming up with anything. And then me talking with Carol, I was feeding that information to them.
So anything that he would give us, we would look into, because he knew the area well.
One promising lead is Carol's description of where Tyson is being held, a simple white house or a hunting trailer, popular in this rural area.
He had told us that she could see him in a building like a deer camp. That focused all of the investigation on buildings and deer camps and stuff. We searched deer camps in Clark County, Hot Spring County, Dallas County. In other words, what she was telling me, the whole investigation was in a roundabout way of swinging to what she had said, because we had no other leads.
But even though Henry is a respected local cop, not everyone involved in the investigation is happy that the Effords have asked a psychic for help.
None of the police would work with me any way, shape, or form. I had to work directly with the Effords. That was the only way.
And we had some of the officers, one officer, elected officer, that said it was the work of the devil. Well, that's his belief. But I'm an investigator. I take anything that I can get a hold of to try to get to the bottom of the case.
The Effords and Carol Pate agree to keep in constant contact. Carol will try to connect psychically with Tyson every day and report what she sees or senses.
I checked on Tyson every single day. I was in contact with the parents every single day. I would give them information that I was seeing, and I knew he wasn't far from where I lost the energy trail.
I wanted to believe that he was still alive and that we would find him. She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
The psychic is sure Tyson is not dead, although some of her visions are deeply disturbing.
He was very frightened. I knew that he was being abused.
She talked about Russian roulette, where they hold a gun to your head and pull the trigger, and that they were doing that to Tyson, but she said he's still alive.
I felt the gun against my head, or Tyson's head. It was a bizarre feeling.
According to Carol's dark, disturbing visions, there are two men who abducted Tyson. One wears cowboy boots and a unique belt buckle, but he disappears from her psychic view. The other man is always there, always has a gun in his hand, and never takes his eyes off Tyson. But there are some visions that Carol does not dare tell the parents.
The man raped Tyson on several occasions. There was a lot of brutality. There was a lot of...
5 days have passed since Tyson disappeared without a trace. Apart from the psychic's visions, there are still no new clues.
I was just wore completely out. I was done to the point that I couldn't think straight. I was to the point that I had to have closure somewhere, because I figured Tyson was dead.
He kept saying, you got to, be prepared for this. You got to be prepared. And I said, I'm not going to be prepared for it. He's still alive. And I said, we got to find him.
And then, suddenly, the psychic's visions turned even darker.
There was a total shift. And I knew that Tyson had maybe 24 hours, that this man was going to do something.
I remember her calling and saying that, we've got to find him, because...
She said something about a grave.
In Carol's vision, Tyson is dragged from the house, taken to a field, shown 3 graves, and forced to kneel down in one of them. Then the man points a gun at his head.
It was very strong, very powerful, and I was very afraid for him.
That night, Carol holds a psychic vigil. A powerful psychic tool she believes could stop Tyson Eford from being killed.
I recognize that my psychic abilities are gifts through God, and I ask and I pray for help, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me, ever. Lord God, we ask at this time for the safe return of Tyson Eford, that there be no harm done to him, no harm to anyone involved. And we ask this now in the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
The same night, around 2 a.m., Malvern police get an unexpected phone call. The Efords' prayers are answered.
I said, my name's Tyson Eford. I've been released.
Against all odds, Tyson Eford has been let go, released on a lonely stretch of highway just a mile from his house.
And he reached over to me and said, can we be friends? Of course, I shook his hand to get out of a situation I was in. And I ran as fast as I could to the nearest house.
I didn't even stop in the road. I just went straight through the yard and went right up to the porch.
And then when I saw Tyson, I got out of the car. And so he grabbed Tyson, and I grabbed him, and of course I was crying and all upset, and I had my baby back.
Tyson's parents take him directly to the hospital. On the way, he talks about his abduction, a story that is both horrifying and chillingly familiar.
After I get Tyson in the unit, he and Nita was in the back seat. And he went and told me, he said, Daddy, he raped me.
Tyson's story is so horrific. His parents are grateful that he's alive to tell it. But it's also so bizarre, the police are finding it hard to believe. A massive manhunt involving the FBI, state and local police, and hundreds of volunteers can't find 17-year-old Tyson Eford. But 6 days after his abduction, he's suddenly released in the middle of the night near his house.
This highway right here is Highway 9. This is where I was dropped off when I was released. And I ran to the nearest house down this road right here.
Like the family, the police are relieved and amazed Tyson is still alive. But the story he tells is so horrifying, it's hard for the police to accept.
Myself and an FBI agent interviewed him for about 5 hours. I needed more information to corroborate what he was telling us.
They said, there's no way he could have gone through what he went through and survived.
The police may be skeptical about Tyson's dark tale, but remarkably, it matches exactly with Carol Pate's psychic visions.
There was questions that I did ask him. I said, was there any guns? And he said they stuck it up to my head. They put a bullet in it, and they kept pulling the trigger. I said, Henry, that's what Carol told us about the Russian roulette.
I didn't know how she would know that. Only I would know that because I was the only one going through it.
What Tyson went through, I experienced to a lesser degree, but nevertheless I experienced it physically. I could feel it physically. That's why I would disconnect. It was extremely painful.
And then I asked him, I said, did one of them wear cowboy boots? And he said, yeah, Kevin Scott wore boots. And from the way I understood, she was seeing this through Tyson's eyes.
I saw the men. I saw the man in camouflage. I saw the belt buckle. But Tyson, I think being the son of police officers, took notice of everything around him.
To confirm Tyson's story and bring the kidnappers to justice, the police need to find the men fast. Tyson gives them a lead, a name he saw on a letter in the house where he was held. Within hours, 35-year-old Carl Meany is arrested. The psychic predicted that Carl Meany's house where Tyson was held was close to Ridge Road. In fact, it was a mere 500 yards.
It amazes me how close she was, how close she got to the house where I was.
Carl Meany's address confirms even more of Carol's visions. His house is small, white, and located in the country. And the route that Carol saw the kidnappers take leads right to the door.
There's two ways to go. But how did she know which road I was on? Why didn't she go somewhere in the city? It's amazing. This is the crossroads off of Ridge Road, where Carol Pate lost the scent right here. She didn't know which way to go, either right that way or left that way. But they went left. If they would have went right, they would have went right to the house.
Meany's address confirms Carol's psychic vision and how close she was to actually finding Tyson. Was she also right about him being in mortal danger? And how close did she come to saving his life? On the 5th day of his abduction, Tyson remembers Meany tying him up and then leaving to go to town. He returns, edgy and upset, and tells Tyson,
Your pictures everywhere, all over the stores, all over the store I went to. Obviously, there's a lot of people looking for you. And I think it really freaked him out where he's going to have to do something today.
He was going to kill Tyson. That was my feeling.
Later that night, he took me out, and he had a gun, a pistol, on him. Walked across the pasture. I seen 3 holes.
I told the parents about the man taking him out and showing him the 3 graves.
I never prayed much before, and I just prayed to the Lord that he would not kill me.
When I realized that Tyson was going to die that night, I had to do something. I had to.
On the night of the 5th day of Tyson's abduction, Carol Pate holds her psychic prayer vigil.
Do I have your agreement for the safe return of Tyson Eford?
I agree.
I agree.
I said, please don't do this to me. Please don't kill me. He says, I've got to kill you.
Be released.
I said, I promise I will not tell anybody where I've been. Just please let me go.
In the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
And then I guess something keyed, his conscience keyed into him, said, I'll let you go. We're on the road right in front of Carl Meany's house, where that night before he let me go, he took me across to a pasture out there where 3 holes were dug. I think he had every intentions to kill me, and I think something triggered in him where the Lord spoke to him and told him not to do this.
What did make Carl Meany decide to spare Tyson and let him go? Whatever the truth, the Eford family believes it was the psychic's prayer circle.
And by Carol having the prayer circle, that's talking to God. I believe that that's what got him back to us safe.
Yes, the good Lord was looking over, because those people were crazy enough to kill him.
I ask and I pray for help, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me.
Tyson and his parents are amazed at the uncanny accuracy of Carol's psychic visions, but the police remain skeptical of Tyson's story until they get another bizarre surprise. The second kidnapper, Kevin Scott, turns himself in.
And then Scott, whenever he turned state evidence, it backed everything Tyson said.
It was a bizarre setup by Carl Meany to use not only Tyson, but to use his own friend as part of his ploy.
Finally, Tyson's story of his abduction is fully confirmed. It was Scott who grabbed him at knife point in the parking lot while Meany drove. He was taken to a small white house in the country where the men played Russian roulette. Meany had fooled Scott, telling him that Tyson was vandalizing his property and needed a scare. But after Scott left, the real reason Meany had abducted Tyson became clear.
They're all playing tricks on Tyson, and Meany's playing tricks on everybody else. Very, very bizarre man, Carl Meany.
With the testimony of Tyson Eford and Kevin Scott, Carl Meany receives 3 life sentences for the brutal kidnap and will spend the rest of his days in prison. Today, Tyson still lives in Malvern. He's married and drives a forklift for a living. He will never forget those 6 horrific days here on Ridge Road, nor a psychic's role in helping his family find him.
I don't know much about psychics, but I know that she gave my parents hope that I was still alive.
Tyson's alive. He's alive.
He was our only son, and she was going to do whatever she could to help us and to assure me that he was still alive.
She had been telling us the truth. She is somebody we'll never forget.
A business trip turns deadly when a state auditor is found at the bottom of a ravine.
Somebody was mad and they took it out on this victim before they actually executed him.
We all knew that foul play had occurred.
There's a killer on the loose and police have little to go on.
Well, we didn't have any blood evidence. We didn't have any fingerprints.
Until a psychic breathes new life into the case.
I'm seeing a murder now. So dangerous.
But are her visions enough to catch a killer in a lie?
We knew that we were only going to get one chance to speak with Eugene Moore.
And will a psychic's chilling premonition come true?
You won't take him alive.
Shelby, Montana. Population 3,300. Part of the Montana High Line, stretching 650 miles from North Dakota to the Idaho border. It's a crossroads where Highway 2 and Interstate 13 meet, a transient place. The last stop for truckers and trains heading to Canada. On the morning of November 13th, 1989, 40-year-old state tax auditor Walter Sullivan left his home in Great Falls and made the 45-mile drive to Shelby for a business trip. He never returned.
Walt was one of the field representatives who worked out in the field, working with employers, collecting taxes, making sure that employers were reporting properly.
Sue Moore worked alongside Walter for 13 years. He was a dedicated employee who had worked for the state for more than 18 years. When Walter fails to show up for 2 of his appointments, his co-workers begin to worry.
I called the governor's office. I will never forget this. Whoever his chief of staff or whoever the person was that I talked to said, he'll show up when he sobers up. And I almost dropped the phone. I said, you got this all wrong.
Their indifference angered Sue. She knew Walt to be a family man. He'd married his high school sweetheart and was the proud father of 2 boys. It would take 24 hours for Shelby police to issue a missing persons report for 40-year-old Walter Sullivan.
We began backtracking every place that Mr. Sullivan had went.
Dave Robbins was the Shelby County investigator on the case. He learns that Walter had 3 appointments the day he went missing and only made it to 1.
We're suspecting that the last person that talked to him was Gene Moore.
Eugene Moore owned and operated a truck stop in Shelby. When police contact him, he says he did meet with Walter and that he left the same day. A week goes by, and Walter's disappearance is big news. The whole town is talking.
We start hearing that he was here, he was there, he's turning up all over town at certain times of the day. And
I knew Walt really, really well, and the idea that he was off gallivanting and sporting about somewhere was just nuts. I mean, just nuts. And of course, a horrible, horrible insult to his family.
We were developing information because we were hoping beyond hope that this man would turn up safe and alive someplace.
November 22nd, 9 days after Walter went missing. His mangled car is spotted 250 feet down in a ravine.
We picked our way down away from it so we wouldn't disturb anything, but as you peered over the top, you could see a body laying down there. So we knew we had a crime scene.
There lay the lifeless body of Walter Sullivan.
The car was pretty banged up because it went off this cliff and rolled down there. So a lot of what we did in video footage was to collect the evidence and document where it was.
It was our worst fear was realized, and we were devastated. All I remember doing is crying and wanting to know that something was being done.
An autopsy would reveal that Walter Sullivan's death was no accident.
The victim had been beaten severely about the head and the face, and that he had been shot at close quarters in the back of the head. Somebody was mad, and they took it out on this victim before they actually executed him.
Who killed Walter Sullivan and why? With no fingerprints and few clues, police revisit the last man who saw him alive. Eugene Moore gives them a more detailed account.
He said around 8 o'clock that Mr. Sullivan left to go to his place to do the audit because that's where he keeps the records. He said that Mr. Sullivan did not follow him directly to his place, arrived a few minutes later, and at that point had another gentleman with him who he described as a Native American with long black hair. He stated that Mr. Sullivan only wanted a couple years state tax returns and some checks from his ledger book, and that's all.
When police do a background check on Moore, they learn he is an ex-Marine and has been trained in combat warfare. They also learn he threatened other auditors in the past.
We all knew that foul play had occurred. I mean, we knew it. Walt had said earlier at a meeting with some of the other field reps that he was going to go to Shelby and see a guy who he was concerned about, who he knew was going to be difficult to work with.
Eugene Moore's business was flagged when the state learned he hadn't filed a tax return in more than 15 years.
We're talking about somebody who truly subscribed to that whole tax protester notion. Walt often had a history of bringing employers like that around so that they would start out being very anti-government. And when Walt got done with them, he made them see why he was doing what he was doing, and which is really what the very best of our field reps were able and still are able to do is promote that.
There was a gentleman that worked at Mr. Moore's truck stop, and this guy had been laid off, and so he went to file for unemployment, and there was no files, there was nothing on him, so Mr. Moore had turned in nothing to the state. That's what precipitated this audit that was coming from Walter Sullivan.
Police obtain a warrant to search Moore's business and home, but find no hard evidence.
I felt I had good evidence in regard, though it was circumstantial. We had no physical evidence to tie our suspect to this crime other than the fact of his story and what he had said to us.
Another snag, Moore's wife, Tammy, provides an alibi for her husband, claiming he was at home that entire evening.
It was during that time that, or after that interview, that we called him back to try to do another one, and we were contacted by a lawyer out of Cutbank who said, I now represent Mr. Gene Moore, and he's not going to talk to you gentlemen again, so leave him alone. And so we backed off for a while.
With nothing else to go on, the case is stalled and sits on the shelf for 6 years. Family and friends of Walter Sullivan couldn't let it go. A state worker murdered on the job, and no one was doing anything about it.
The worst part of the aftermath of Walt's tragedy was knowing that this employer was wandering around literally on the loose, and apparently, as we found out later, had changed businesses, had moved around up there, none of which I knew about. It was infuriating. I was mad to tears.
Finally, Sue's anger turned to action. She writes a letter to the local paper demanding justice for Walter Sullivan. That single letter hit a nerve. News media across the state picked up the story.
The pressure actually came from outside. It came from news media, Great Falls. We were constantly being called, and I think people were upset that a crime like this would happen in this community.
It pressured Montana's Attorney General to assign Joe Uribe, an agent from the Department of Justice, to solve Walter Sullivan's murder once and for all.
We had a meeting between all the officers that were involved in the early investigation and myself.
Joe, right off the bat, he saw the difficulties with the case itself. He knew everything we had. He saw the evidence. He saw the statements. So he knew what we were up against.
After reviewing the case, I felt that there were some things we could do to help get the case going again.
That something different was a psychic.
And I got home, and I turned on the TV. I was pretty tired, but I was amped up after reading the case file. So I turned on the television, and there was a program about psychics on there. After watching her on 3 different cases that she worked on, I felt that maybe she could be some help to us.
A psychic encounter was about to ignite a 6-year cold case, and her visions would stun police.
This was revenge.
In northern Montana, a state auditor is found dead at the bottom of a ravine. He'd been beaten and shot in the head. Police have a suspect, but no hard evidence. The case stalls. 6 years go by, and family and friends demand answers. Who killed Walter Sullivan? Feeling the heat, the state assigns a new investigator to the case. Joe Uribe knows he has to solve this murder no matter what it takes, even if it means traveling more than 2,000 miles to ask a psychic for help.
We decided to fly down to Florida because we had some evidence, and she wanted us to mail the evidence to her, and we didn't want to do that. I was still pretty skeptical. I'd never worked with a psychic before, nor had I ever dreamed of working with a psychic.
I was very skeptical, and honestly, I thought it was just a waste of time.
But after we talked about it a while, we thought, since the case was stalled, what harm could it do?
Noreen Renier is a psychometrist who specializes in missing persons and homicide cases.
Psychometry is touching an object and getting impressions in your head and your mind about the object. And we are energy, and a residue of it is left behind in an object. In very passionate crimes of hate or love, it seems like it leaves more energy than just a missing person walking in the woods and being lost. So homicide is easier for me because the energies are much more powerful. Although violent, they're easier for me to pick up.
Investigators use a video camera to document the session.
Give me the first name of the victim, and then what I'm going to do is just very briefly describe the victim, just enough so you know I'm in tune to it.
In our case, we brought several pieces of clothing, and we even brought the bullet that was in the victim's head.
I remember touching the items, the clothing, and I got a picture of the victim. I can feel facial hair.
She told us that she could see the victim and that he had facial hair. Walter Sullivan had a beard. She told us that he was short, stocky, physique, short-necked. Basically described Walter to the T.
Without a word from the investigators, Noreen has no idea whether she has locked on to their victim, Walter Sullivan.
I'm sure that they thought it was a more scientific process if they didn't react, but somehow I needed that little bit of feedback, but I kept going without any feedback.
We told her nothing about the case, and some of the things she said was just incredible.
I see a blue metal building. I see something like an antenna, like 3 going up, train tracks going close by. There was railroad tracks very close to the blue shed.
Remarkably, Noreen is describing the home of their prime suspect, Eugene Moore.
The physical features that Noreen described, such as a blue metal building, there was a blue metal building on the property. She said there was a railroad track close by. Well, just right across the road from him was a railroad track. And it was strikingly accurate.
At one point, a name just sort of popped in my head, the name Clark. C-L-A-I-R. Oh, I just feel that sort of name coming in. Clark. And they sort of looked at each other but said nothing.
Came out kind of spontaneously that she said this word Clark, and incidentally, the body and the car were found on the Clark Ranch about 9 miles southwest of town. We were just amazed. We couldn't believe it. In fact, the hair was standing on the back of my neck a time or two.
And now she gives them a piece of information they didn't know.
The moment she touched the bullet, she had a vision of an attack on Walter Sullivan.
And all of a sudden I was ambushed. Oh, I'm hurting. They're hitting me on the head.
We knew that Walter had been beaten, but we didn't know how many people were involved with it or what the circumstances were.
This was planned. They're torturing him. This was about revenge. And then all of a sudden, I had this excruciating pain in the back of my head.
Something went in her head there, or some pain in her head, and that's exactly where Walter was shot. We had developed information about these two other suspects, but they in fact had been eliminated from being in the area. But Noreen was able to put together for us that they were part of the ambush that occurred out at this Blue Metal building. But she basically laid out the scenario of what we believe is the actual fact of what happened with Walter Sullivan.
But investigators were about to be amazed even more.
God, it's so dangerous. You won't take him alive. I saw the face in my head, one eye at a time. Each feature, the artist put it together. Eyebrows more close to the eyes. So we had two faces for them. One is a male and one was a female.
She provided information to her artist, which very accurately depicted our main suspect and his wife.
They again looked at each other, thanked me, packed up their stuff, and left. Again, no feedback on how well I did or how badly I did. No grades were given.
What Noreen didn't know was that her visions gave police new reason to go back to their prime suspect, Eugene Moore.
For me, it brought all of the elements together, and I knew at that point that we had the right man. We'd done intensive homework. We went back step by step through his statement, and we reviewed everything he told us, and we went out to look to see if this is true or not true.
Uribe visits Moore at his truck stop and tells him he is with the Attorney General's office. He says he's there to close the Walter Sullivan case once and for all and wants to hear Moore's side of the story.
He opened up just like a flower and said, well, absolutely. I've been waiting to talk to somebody. I have a lot of things that I want to say.
This time, Moore's story is very different from the one he told 6 years ago. He states that Walter did show up at his truck stop and asked for his records. Moore told Sullivan they were in the blue building and that he should get them himself. He then says he never saw Sullivan again.
And here he comes out with an entirely different set of information, a whole different story. And, of course, it was contrary to everything he told us back in 1989.
Back in 1989, Moore claimed that he met Walter at his home and that he noticed a Native American in his car. He personally handed Walter his records and watched them both drive away.
It's typical when a person is lying to you, a year later or 2 years later, whatever, they don't remember their lies. Everybody remembers the truth, but you can't remember when you lie.
Uribe decides to take a chance. After 6 years, police had no new evidence against Moore, but what they did have was a psychic scenario of how Walter Sullivan was killed, and Uribe uses it on Moore. On the morning of November 13th, 1989, Walter Sullivan meets Eugene Moore at his house to discuss his taxes. Sullivan follows Moore towards his blue shed. It's there that he's ambushed by Moore and 2 other men. They stuff Sullivan's body into the trunk of his own car, drive 9 miles, and push it off the side of Clark Road, where it drops 250 feet down into a ravine.
Moore had no idea what we knew, and that worked very well for us because it acted like we had the details of what actually happened on the day of the murder. And the more we got into it, the more broken down he became.
Incredibly, the psychic's version of the crime was true enough to convince Moore to break down and confess.
You could just see an emotional change on his face.
After 6 years, police finally have a confession. But do they have their man?
He went from a very positive, hey, I have something to say here and I want the world to know I didn't do this and here's why. But as we broke him down and as we showed all the discrepancies, you could just see him kind of shirk and shrink in his chair. And then he began to come around to the point where he wanted to, hey, if I confess to this, what's going to happen to me? And then he started trying to make arrangements or cut a deal with us right on the spot to determine how many years in prison he was going to get. He had told us he didn't want to go to prison and that we'd never take him alive.
A psychic's vision is about to go unheeded.
You won't take him alive.
A Montana state auditor is found dead near the small town of Shelby. After 6 years, a co-worker's letter would make state headlines and puts investigator Joe Uribe under the gun to solve the crime. With no new leads, Uribe asks a psychic for help. Her visions of the crime send the police back to their prime suspect. When confronted, he confesses.
His story finally crumbled right before his eyes. He broke down.
At last, police have Eugene Moore exactly where they want him. But instead of taking him into custody, police decide to follow protocol and let him go.
Our Attorney General instructed us not to arrest him because it had been so long since the murder. We wanted to put it into a warrant of arrest with a information that we would file with the judge and let a judge determine, based on the information we had, whether or not there was enough grounds or probable cause to go ahead and make the arrest.
It was a costly mistake, one that the psychic had predicted.
He's so dangerous. You won't take him alive.
He had told us he didn't want to go to prison and that we'd never take him alive. And once he walked out that door, I knew we'd made a big mistake.
When police return the next day with an arrest warrant, Eugene Moore is gone. He's spotted heading towards the Canadian border.
We knew he had a handgun and we knew he had a rifle. And we felt at that point that it was very dangerous. But we had to stop him. We called ahead and radioed ahead and had additional forces come in, and they used stop sticks, which are devices that are used to blow out the tires on a vehicle. And we had them deployed in such a manner that we got his tires flattened. And in the event of that, he even still went 1.5 miles after his tires went down because he didn't want to stop.
Police do all they can to stop Moore, and when they finally do, he tries to shoot himself, fails, and turns his gun on police.
Several shots were exchanged. 2 officers were shot before Mr. Moore was in fact shot and killed.
Noreen's premonition was right. Police would never take Eugene Moore alive.
Officials say it began when they tried to arrest Eugene Moore for a 1989 murder. But minutes later, deputies found themselves on a chase. Moore led them down this road, and that is apparently when the gunfire broke out.
We didn't want him to kill himself or get shot. We wanted him to go to prison. Being these anti-government leanings that he had, didn't feel that he owed the government anything. He's a businessman, and in fact hadn't paid taxes in years.
Eugene Moore's death meant there would be no justice for Walter Sullivan. Any evidence of Moore's accomplices died with him.
All the evidence that we had, nothing could be corroborated. As far as his involvement went, and especially any closure for the victim's family in a court case at all.
We should never have allowed him to get away from us. We should have arrested him on the spot. Looking back on it all, that probably was the biggest mistake in my career.
But there's no mistaking that a psychic's vision helped police to force a killer's hand.
The thing that Noreen Rainier did for us is, you know, police work, we did all the basics. We went back and did all the groundwork. And all the elements were there, but there just wasn't quite enough to make the arrest.
I think I gave them more ammunition and more confidence about what really happened, so when they confronted the murderer, they could bring these things out by my clues, my information, my seeing what happened to Walter and how he was killed.
I, as an investigator, would not discount any information from any source. You get it, you filter it. If it's of use, you use it, you run with it. And that's the way I view the psychic.
I think I'm accurate in all my cases. Never 100%. Nothing is ever 100%, even in this reality. In the psychic world, of course it's not. But I felt very accurate. I felt the pictures were coming. I was seeing clearly. I felt I did my job, and I think I did it well. I don't feel I solve crimes. I think I'm just a small part in helping it come to a successful conclusion.
Sue Moore's efforts to convince the state to reinvestigate would bring Walter's killer down and change the way the state of Montana did business.
Field reps now carry cell phones, are much better about documenting where they are and how long they're going to be. And frankly, if there's any question at all, they subpoena the employer into the sheriff's office. Walt was a tough guy, and he believed he could handle his job. I mean, the reason he asked to be moved out to the field from being a computer guy was he really wanted to work with employers. He had a great talent and skill for it. For me, that was really the great tragedy of Walt's story, was this guy who loved his job, loved what he did, cared so much about providing a good service as a state employee, was not served well, in my opinion, during that time. It was a very awful thing to live through. I cannot imagine what his family went through. As a friend, I know how incredibly painful and tragic it was. To me, there was just a sense that at least it's resolved.
Sue Moore was determined to keep Walter Sullivan's memory alive. She lobbied, and finally in March 2004, 15 years after his death, the state renamed a building in Walter Sullivan's honor.
Walt was, in many ways for me, a mentor. I mean, there's not a time I walk into that building and see that plaque and don't have a memory of Walt in that building. It's great to have that there, but I sure wish we didn't have to have it.
An elderly widow is brutally murdered in her home.
This was an absolute senseless crime.
Police have little evidence and no one's talking.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community.
But a psychic has disturbing visions of the crime.
She had been stabbed so many times.
Can a psychic's insights solve the mystery of who killed Rose Swartwood? Elmira, New York, an historic town of clapboard houses and white picket fences. A town Huckleberry Finn author Mark Twain once called home. A town unaccustomed to crime. But not on August 25th, 1988. On that day, 74-year-old Rose Swartwood, widowed and living alone, is found dead in her apartment. She'd been the victim of a shocking attack. Beaten, bitten, and stabbed to death.
I think the nature of the crime, being an elderly woman that lived alone, was very upsetting.
It caught a lot of the media attention and upset a lot of the people in the community.
I mean, it was a terrible, heinous crime.
Mike Moosey from the local sheriff's office and Corky Patterson from the Elmira Police Department are assigned to investigate this gruesome case.
Yeah, there hadn't been a murder in Elmira in several years.
Jim Pfeiffer is a journalist who covered the story.
What bothered people the most, I thought, was this is a woman who's innocent, who has no enemies. It could happen to me. You know, it isn't supposed to happen to anyone, but especially to people like this.
It was believed from the very beginning of this investigation that it was possibly a burglary gone to a homicide rather than a planned homicide. I think we felt quite strongly that this was not anticipated to be a homicide from the beginning, but more a burglary gone bad.
Moosey and Patterson face major problems. Despite the apparent frenzy of the murder, little forensic evidence was left behind by Rose's killers.
The crime scene was very cleaned up. There were some things disturbed still when the police arrived there, but it appeared they had scrubbed down the walls and the floors with some type of cleaning agent.
Not only this, but locals are reluctant to talk.
A lot of times people just would clam up and they give them false information. So it would make it more difficult for the police, who in this community were used to quickly solving a crime.
Rose lived in one of Elmira's tougher neighborhoods, the Hawthorne Court Housing Project.
Oh, I believe there were people that felt they would be threatened if they cooperated with the police.
Scores of potential suspects are interviewed and eliminated. Only 2 rise to the top of the list. William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore, both local, both well known to police.
We were relatively certain who these suspects were and what their involvement in the crime was.
With little evidence to tie Cuddy and Moore to the crime scene and no witnesses prepared to come forward, the investigation gradually stalls.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community. Police being blamed for not doing a good job, when that wasn't the case. They were doing a good job. They just couldn't get a lot of cooperation, a lot of information.
Months pass with no new leads. The case grows cold. But detectives Moosey and Patterson don't give up. They're not about to let Rose Swartwood's killers away with murder. 2 years after her homicide, with nothing to lose, Detective Moosey decides to try something very different. He decides to enlist a psychic.
I had heard about Phil Jordan from other law enforcement agencies. I had never been to him before.
Phil Jordan is one of America's best-known psychics with a strong track record of helping cops solve difficult crimes.
I have been working with the police for the past 35 years.
Jordan uses photographs to make a psychic connection to crime scenes.
When I work on a case, I will take a picture of the victim. And as I look at that picture, I start seeing things about that person.
Detectives decide to tell Jordan nothing about Rose Swartwood or her murder.
When Corky and Mike came to the first meeting, they brought a picture of Rose Swartwood with them. And I looked at that picture and did a reading.
Right away, Jordan surprises the police.
The perpetrators, I felt, came into the dwelling believing they were going to do a burglary, and they were surprised to find that there was a person in the house. And then I feel as though both the perpetrators felt as though the whole situation went completely wrong, that they had gotten much more involved than they wanted to in the crime itself.
Jordan claims his visions reveal not only what happened during the crime, but also what the killers did after.
Then I felt as though they would try to put things back the way they had found it.
Again, the cops are surprised. Jordan has just identified the reason their investigation has so little physical evidence. But the big question is, can he tell them who killed Rose Swartwood? To find out, they hand him a stack of photos.
I took probably between 50 and 75 mugshots of various people to see if any of them had any significance to him whatsoever.
We had pictures of people who had been suspects but ruled out, and we had pictures of people who we didn't think had any involvement whatsoever. No names on any of the photographs or anything.
Just quietly, we sat there for approximately 10 or 15 minutes as he flipped through several mugshots. And I noticed, as did Sergeant Patterson, he pulled out a picture of Bill Cuddy and set it aside. He then continued to flip through the photographs, and probably 20 or 30 photographs later, he pulled a mugshot of Demetrius Moore, and he laid that down.
I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
It was a moment that would change the course of a 2-year investigation.
When he pulled those two pictures out and set them aside, I was trying my best not to look at Sergeant Patterson, but he had pulled out our 2 prime suspects.
With no prior knowledge, how could the psychic have zeroed in on the 2 prime suspects?
Just about everything he described was pretty much on the money.
But can a psychic's dark visions help police find justice for Rose Swartwood? For 2 years, Elmira, New York area detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been hunting the vicious killer of an elderly widow.
Very unusual for us to have a crime like that. It was extremely rare here.
With little evidence and no witnesses, the police investigation had hit a wall until a psychic identifies the 2 prime suspects who, up to now, detectives haven't had the evidence to arrest.
When he completed going through all the photographs, he put the rest of them down and said that he felt the 2 that he had pulled out, that being the photographs of Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy, were in fact the 2 people that he felt were directly involved in the crime of the death of Rose Swartwood.
William Cuddy is a name very familiar to Elmira police.
Cuddy was doing time. He pled guilty in June of '89 to the sexual abuse charge that I had originally investigated him on.
William Cuddy was a suspect because a jailhouse informant had contacted Detective Moosey saying Cuddy had been bragging in jail about killing Rose. But when the detective tried to question Cuddy, the prisoner wouldn't talk.
He had an incredible loss of memory. He did not wish to remember any of the details and immediately posed a problem for us.
Demetrius Moore is another story.
Demetrius Moore was actually a neighbor of the victim and was questioned along with several other people as a potential suspect.
Moore has remained a suspect because he had a motive. He blamed Rose and her complaints about his loud music for his eviction from Hawthorne Court.
In fact, a few weeks prior to her death, some obscenities were written on her back door. It was alleged that Demetrius was the one that was responsible for putting those obscenities on the back door.
People in the neighborhood are afraid of Demetrius Moore. Rumors on the street say he is linked to the criminal underworld. His reputation has been a major stumbling block to the investigation.
Demetrius was free and on the street, and which was another thing that hampered some people wanting to cooperate with us.
By pulling the 2 mugshots, Phil Jordan has confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. Now the psychic has a vision of the actual crime.
Whenever I work a case, I not only try to discover how the person may have died, but I also try to figure out what the injuries were inflicted with. In this case, I felt as though she was stabbed, and I could feel that there'd be a rather long knife that was used.
If one was to read the autopsy report, they'd understand that Mr. Jordan's descriptions were quite correct.
The psychic also claims he can see which of the 2 suspects actually stabbed Rose.
Phil described to us that the person who did the actual slaying, the actual killing itself, would have a tattoo on their shoulder.
I noticed a marking on his arm that would be a tattoo, and I felt that it had a woman's name in it, but I couldn't make out the woman's name.
I knew that Cuddy had such a tattoo on his left shoulder. Mike was not aware of it. No one else connected with the case was aware of it.
And that he was the perpetrator, the assailant that killed Rose Swartwood.
The tattoo is a stunning revelation, one that Jordan had no way of knowing.
Yeah, he was able to describe Mr. Cuddy as being a vicious person, a person who hated women, had a deep hatred for women.
After 2 frustrating years, Detectives Moosey and Patterson's visit to Phil Jordan re-energizes the case. More than ever, they believe Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are responsible for the death of Rose Swartwood.
We left there with some pretty surprising feelings that he had told us things about Cuddy that probably not a lot of people had known or even investigated.
But now the police must prove that Cuddy and Moore are the killers, and it's not going to be easy.
So we continued to build the case, and we weren't going to jump before we had all the evidence we could collect and all the information that we needed.
A major difficulty has been placing Cuddy and Moore at the crime scene. The detectives revisit the forensic evidence.
There was a sample of blood that was found at the point of entry, which is a rear door, a small broken window.
The drop of blood doesn't match the DNA of either Rose Swartwood or William Cuddy, but trying to match it to Demetrius Moore has stymied the police.
You would have to apply for a court order. And in this case, in order to get a court order, you would at least need enough evidence to substantiate that this person was a viable suspect. Initially, we didn't feel we had enough evidence to do that.
The other piece of forensic evidence comes from the victim's body, bite marks. In the struggle before she died, Rose Swartwood was bitten on the shoulder.
Bite marks are very difficult to identify most of the time, especially when the victim is the receiver of the bite mark.
Though the psychic and the cops both believe William Cuddy stabbed Rose, the investigators don't believe he bit her, and for good reason.
Mr. Cuddy wore dentures, and it was clear that the person who did the biting didn't wear dentures.
If Moore and Cuddy were accomplices in the murder, Moore must be the one who did the biting.
There was actually a photograph taken of Demetrius Moore's teeth on the day of the homicide. When he was being interviewed, the detectives thought enough and were smart enough to take a voluntary picture of his teeth.
Demetrius Moore's teeth may be the key to solving the murder mystery, but he's about to do something no one could ever imagine. For 2 years, detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been investigating the murder of elderly widow Rose Swartwood.
This was an absolute senseless crime from the very beginning.
Psychic Phil Jordan has identified the 2 prime suspects, Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy.
At the time of the incident, I believe that I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
Detectives have only 2 significant pieces of evidence: a single drop of blood and bite marks found on the victim. Police believe the bite marks belong to Demetrius Moore, but before they can prove it, Moore does something very strange.
The unique thing there was it was found that Demetrius had filed his teeth.
Using a chisel, incredibly, Moore files down his own teeth. What's worse for detectives, they're still unable to obtain a warrant to test Moore's DNA or indeed make a mold of his now damaged teeth. Frustrated, the detectives return to Phil Jordan. What they really want to know is what connects their 2 prime suspects.
There was no information, or anyone had never come forward to put those 2 together at any given time.
Again, the psychic, who has been told nothing about the case, amazes the detectives. He confirms their belief that Cuddy and Moore were together at a party the night Rose was killed.
I felt as I observed the party, it would be a party I would not want to go to because I know I would feel uncomfortable by the character of people that were there. I could see that it was people having a good time, but yet more for the sake of partying to probably drink and get high.
The party is crucial to the investigation. It's the potential link that puts Cuddy and Moore together the night of the murder.
When we learned about the party initially occurring the night of the homicide, it was very difficult for us to get people at the party to remember who came, who left, who was there, who came with who. So locating people that were at the party for additional information on these 2 or anyone else that might have been with them was very difficult for a period of time.
I remember very distinctly seeing the house where I felt that the party had taken place, that there would have to be an enclosed stairwell going up the outside of the house.
He felt that the house was, I believe he said, green in color and had a very distinct outside staircase which led to a second floor, which Sergeant Patterson and I knew to be the location of the party house.
I felt as though they would be first at the party, they would leave the party, commit this heinous act, and then go back to the party, which showed me they probably had little conscience.
Is Jordan's paranormal vision correct? Detectives in Elmira, New York are closer than ever to solving the murder of Rose Swartwood. Armed with a psychic's visions of the crime, they confront reluctant witnesses.
We did have people that came forward, finally, and did remember Cuddy coming with Demetrius Moore. Yes, that link was finally made.
Those witnesses now paint a startling portrait of Moore and Cuddy's behavior the night of the murder.
Demetrius and Cuddy left the party, supposed to go get some beer and money for beer and drugs or whatever. When they returned, Cuddy had a lot of blood on him. Demetrius had a small amount on him, and there was some argument out on the porch, and I believe Demetrius was saying something like, you didn't have to kill her like that.
Once again, Phil Jordan was right. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy were together the night Rose Swartwood was killed. Finally, police have the link that puts their suspects together the night of the crime. They can now get the court order to compare Moore's DNA with that single drop of blood found at the crime scene.
We certainly felt confident that there would be a match, or at least a grouping that was consistent with, which would be sound evidence against him being at the scene of the crime, which he had denied, for years at this point.
Demetrius Moore's DNA matches the blood found on Rose Swartwood's broken window. Moore and Cuddy are charged with the second-degree murder of Rose Swartwood. At the trial, Moore challenges one of the key pieces of evidence against him, that he filed down his teeth.
The most unusual thing I ever saw on a witness stand. His excuse was, when he took the stand, his teeth were chipped up like that because he opened beer bottles with his teeth. And he opened up 2 beer bottles on the stand. His lawyer wanted to show the jury on the stand.
What it didn't do is alter the pattern of his teeth. It certainly altered the ridges of the teeth,
so they couldn't match the bite marks exactly. It didn't do him any good to file his teeth.
Evidence at the trial showed Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy met at the party house. When they ran out of drugs and alcohol, Moore suggested they rob Rose.
Unfortunately, she had returned home that evening and was found in the apartment. She had apparently been getting ready for bed or just going to bed when the entry was made.
The robbers surprised Rose. There was a struggle. Moore bit the elderly, defenseless victim on the shoulder. Then William Cuddy began to stab her, and he stabbed her over 40 times. After killing Rose Swartwood, Cuddy and Moore dragged her body to her bed, and before leaving, they methodically washed the blood from the floor and the walls, missing just a single drop. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are both found guilty, and both men are sentenced to 25 years.
I can't speak for the jury, so I don't know if it had an impact on the jury or on the trial. It had an impact on me that someone could not only brutally murder a 72 or 74-year-old woman this way, but then stay around and clean it up afterwards. They have to have no remorse, no conscience.
Today, the detectives are still amazed at the accuracy of Phil Jordan's visions. The psychic pulled William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore's photo from a stack of mugshots and identified Cuddy as the killer by a tattoo on his shoulder. Phil described the attack as a robbery gone bad and the party house where Cuddy and Moore hatched their plan.
A good psychic can provide you with leads or something, or an avenue to go on when you don't have any.
He's done some Pretty amazing things.
They wanted to resolve the case for the family and for Rose, but they also wanted the community to be safe.